So we're here.
We are.
Zach Bitter.
Episode 1.
Episode 1. What am I doing? So, well, welcome to Austin, dude.
Yeah, thanks.
Finally doing this. You moved here how long ago?
Let's see. I think 3 weeks ago. 3 weeks ago on, 3, I think it is.
Yeah, it's crazy, man. You loving it so far?
Yeah, it's been awesome.
Barbecue?
Some barbecue for sure, and no doubt about that. Just kind of getting to know the area and stuff. I was fortunate that I actually was in Austin probably 4 or 5 times last year for work, and it just allowed me to kind of figure some things out. And my wife went to Baylor for her law degree, so she's kind of familiar with the area, and worked in Dallas for 10 years before we got married. So she's always kind of wanted to head back this way. So we're excited to check it out.
No brainer for her, I bet.
Yeah, no doubt.
So what made you want to move out here?
Yeah, it was kind of a combination of things. I think after maybe my third or fourth trip out here, I just went back and was starting to look at just like kind of what 2022 is going to look like for what I do. And for those curious, I do a lot of coaching, podcasting, endurance athlete, that sort of stuff. So I kind of have a few irons in the fire, and it seems like all of them are kind of a little better done here. And some of the stuff I want to kind of add to that and grow with it will be a little better done in Austin. So when I went back from one of those trips, I was just talking to my wife, Nicole, about it, and she basically had a bag ready for Austin and was like, all right, let's do it.
No question. She's just already one foot out the door.
Well, it was funny because we moved to Phoenix originally when we got married, and in her job, she does compliance work for a big company that helps really big companies with like their healthcare compliance. So she was traveling a lot for work before the pandemic. And then like most traveling employees, when the pandemic hit, they found all the different remote ways to kind of execute their stuff. And a lot of places learned that they can lean on that quite heavily even outside of the pandemic. So her job went way more remote than it was before. So now she's in a spot where she can be basically anywhere and still do it. And it actually is a little more convenient for her to be closer to the East Coast time zone or Central time zone now. So it kind of all our stuff kind of lined up at the same time. And as fate would have it, like the Phoenix housing market just blew up over the pandemic. So our house there, we were in kind of a good spot to sell it. And you end up sinking it all into the market here, obviously. But
Everyone's coming out here now. It's getting crazy. I think they said something about, like last I heard, it was like 150 new people a day, something wild. But no, it's great, man. Like I personally don't mind it. I love it. I think it's great that people are moving here. And, I know a lot of people aren't the biggest fans, but I think it does a lot of good if done right. But and she runs too, right? Your wife? That's how you guys kind of met?
Yeah. She's a very competitive ultra runner herself. She's had one of the biggest 100-milers in the world is the Western States 100, and she's been top 10 there 3 times. And that's a pretty big goal for a lot of ultra runners to place top 10 at Western States. Wow. She's actually got the second fastest North American 100-mile time on a trail. She did that at a race here in Texas, the Rocky Raccoon 100, and at the time it was the USATF Trail Championships. So I think she's the only woman to go under 15 hours on that course. She ran like 14:22, which comes up to like an 8.5 minute mile pace on trail. So she had a pretty good day that day.
I don't know how that happens, man. Like that's so crazy. I get so tired after like 10 minutes on a Stairmaster. So hearing these numbers are just mind blowing. And so what is USATF?
U.S. Track and Field.
Okay.
Yeah, so they're kind of the governing body, so they kind of oversee all the championship racing and that sort of stuff.
Yeah, I'm learning all these sports. Like having this brand is like, I gotta learn everything now. Like I've always just been a gym rat kind of guy, so trying to get more involved in those sports is pretty exciting. And so like when we met, I didn't even know what ultra marathon any of that was. And so when you're explaining it to me, I was like, you actually run that? So for people that don't know, kind of explain what you did and kind of your accomplishments in that, the accolades behind how you've become such like a top level athlete in the ultra marathon competitive, that demographic.
Yeah, I think a little over 10 years ago, I was kind of like you. I didn't really know a whole lot about the sport. It was interesting. I actually read a book, or actually no, before that, when I was in, I think my senior year in high school or right around there, my cross country coach just told me about this guy who was going to try to run like 300 miles without stopping or something like that. And I was like, geez, what's going on with this guy? Yeah. And I remember like kind of like sticking that in the back of my mind, like, okay, I got to check out that guy at some point. And eventually, I think by my maybe junior year of college, I read his book and was like, wow, that's a pretty cool sport. And thought to myself, I'd probably maybe try something like that someday. But also thought like maybe when I'm in my 30s, I'll take a shot at something like that and focus on kind of marathon and shorter stuff I was kind of more familiar with high school and college background in track and cross country, where we were focused on like 5K, 10K usually for the most part. Mm-hmm. And then when I was around, I think I was 24, it was 2010, end of the year, I was looking for just a race to kind of jump in around the fall timeline. And I found out there was a 50 miler in Wisconsin where I was living. And at that point, I had no clue there were actually ultra marathons in Wisconsin. Yeah. I was like, there's things, I think I assumed they were just all out west for the most part. And that's where most of them are and were at the time. So it wasn't that off point, but I jumped in that one and ended up winning it. So It was, it was kind of a cool like intro to the sport. I took a full year off from racing ultramarathons after that because I still wasn't convinced it was what I wanted to necessarily do. But I did that same event the following year, and that kind of led to 2 more 50 milers within about a 2-month time frame. Then I was hooked. So by 2012, I was like, all right, this is what I want to focus on. And then it was a lot of 50 milers. I ended up doing a 100 miler in 2012. The Western States 100 was my first race over 50 miles. And that kind of introduced me to that side of the sport. So I was like, okay, there's a lot of work to be done here. Yeah. And so 2013, I had a race that I think is probably the one that put me on the map, so to speak, or like showed the ultra running community that I was capable of running a high quality event and stuff like that. And that was the Desert Solstice Track Invitational. And I broke the 100-mile American record and 12-hour world record there. And that kind of introduced me to just a different side of the sport. Because before that, I was pretty much along the line of this is mostly a trail sport, not a lot of options on kind of runnable roads, tracks, and things like that. So that kind of highlighted that side of the sport to me, and also highlighted just specificity of training, like how important it is to be able to train in the environment you're going to race or have access to some of that stuff when you can. And that became kind of a bit of a focus point of mine, and I've been targeting kind of runnable 100-milers since then. And in 2019, I broke what at the time was the 100-mile world record and the 12-hour world record. Competed on Team USA at World Championships on 3 occasions. I've won national championships at the 50-mile, 100K, and 100-mile distance on the road. And I like to do the trail stuff still too. I just do a little less of it. So I've won like the San Diego 100, the Javelina 100. Some more kind of trail, slower, quote unquote, or like the way I like to describe it is the track stuff. You're eliminating all the variables that you can in terms of hurdles to get over. So you run as fast as you possibly can. You get on the trails and it's more about kind of adapting to what it presents to you that day. So like Javelina oftentimes gets really hot. So you're dealing with like sometimes the year I won Javelina, it was like, I think it was course record temps of 102 degrees out in the desert. So you're just roasting all day long.
And do you like, you don't take breaks in between? Like I was thinking about that the other day is like, is it a straight run or do you actually like, are there times you just take a minute to break and relax and hydrate and stuff like that? Or you just go full send the whole time?
Yeah, it gets interesting. So the track events, it's really dialed in to the point where if you stop, it's because you probably had to use the bathroom or you decided to stop. You didn't necessarily need to because there's someone to hand you your nutrition. The best, most efficient way is having someone out there to like hand you a bottle, hand you whatever you need, a pack, food, whatever it is you want. And you just kind of grab and go and then do that as you're moving. Even if you're moving a little slower, at least you're kind of making some headway. The trails get a little more tricky because you oftentimes have spots where you don't have crew to come and do that for you. So they have like aid stations. And at that aid station, you kind of have to stop to get the stuff you need to make sure it's sustainable all day long. So those you end up having kind of built-in breaks that are more necessity than anything. So the most efficient I've been is I did a race in 2015 where I think I stopped for a total of 60 to 90 seconds. And that was just to jump in the porta potty, finish up business, get back out on the track and start running again. And so
I'm thinking like 10-minute break, like relax, like just cool off. But 90-second break is crazy. Like that's insane, man. So like what goes into like a training regimen? Like you obviously you'll pick a race and then, do you have like a specific routine leading up to that? Like, is there, like a certain regiment that goes into it? Like those are the things that I was really curious about.
Yeah. I think the philosophy that I tend to follow the closest, almost regardless of the distance, is I try to move kind of least specific to most specific in terms of what I'm doing. So the first thing I do is I sit down and I decide like, well, what types of workouts and things do I need to do to be best prepared for this event? And once I kind of have a list of those, then I kind of order them in kind of order of priority from least specific to race intensity to the most specific. So if it's something like 100 miles, we're getting pretty far to one end of the spectrum, like really slow, but for a very long period of time. So that type of a race intensity is oftentimes pretty close to like an easy running pace for whatever that happens to be for the individual, versus say like a 5K where you're getting like pretty close to your short interval pace that you would do in training. And it tends to be quite a bit faster than most of the workouts you do. So it becomes like an order of an operations thing at that point, where if I'm doing a 100 miler, I'm going to focus primarily on, assuming I have a good kind of aerobic foundation in place, I'm going to focus on short intervals pretty early in the plan, and then move to like longer intervals, or what they call tempo runs. So those I like to define as like an intensity that you could sustain for like 45 to 60 minutes if you were just to like be in good shape, get on a starting line and run as far as you can get in 45 to 60 minutes. So I'll do like interval sessions at that intensity. That'll be kind of a focus point. And then when I get kind of closer to the event, like maybe 6-8 weeks out, I'll start really developing the long run, which is going to be the most specific thing to race intensity, race day environment as I can get. So if I'm doing a track ultra, a lot of times I'll do those long runs on a track. If I'm doing a trail one, I'll oftentimes do those on a trail. But it's a lot of things like 30 miles on Saturday, 30 miles on Sunday is kind of like a pretty standard back-to-back long run structure near the end of it. And it's supposed to mimic the race as close as possible. And really the big thing with ultra running, especially the 100-mile stuff, is like you're so far from doing the actual distance in training on any one given day that you just have a little more guesswork, or you're pulling from prior experiences a little more to try to figure out whether it was a sustainable pace, what you should target for a finishing time, and that sort of stuff. Like even the marathon, as long as it is, a lot of the pros are getting up close to that distance in training, and they might even do like an 18-mile long run with like 16 miles at goal marathon pace or something like that. So when they finish a workout like that, they've got a pretty good idea of whether they're going to be able to do it sustainably or not. And it's more of a question of like not goofing something up or making a mistake or having something uncertain happen to them on the day of. Whereas with 100 miles, even with back-to-back 30 milers, there's still quite a bit of distance to kind of problem solve around between there and the finish.
God, just so much that goes into it. Like, it's just, that's crazy, man. No, that's really cool. So I'm willing to bet that there's even a diet restriction on it, like, or can you just eat whatever, or are there like specific foods that you stay away from or eat before?
Today's episode is brought to you by ReGen Health and Wellness. The team at ReGen Health and Wellness is devoted to helping patients revitalize, repair, and renew the optimal blueprint of yourself. They provide an individualized and concierge model of healthcare, empowering patients to optimize their health span and overall quality of life. It's said no one can escape father time, but almost everyone can make the conscious decision and commit to living better and healthier lives. It begins with a mindset. They offer both in-clinic and telemedicine consultations. So whether you're due for a routine checkup or struggling to hit your health and fitness goals, go online or give them a call to schedule your appointment today.
Going into it or like leading up to it, those are things I'm really curious about too. Like, obviously you got to eat semi-clean, but are there foods that you stay away from that might actually hold you back? Or, what is like type of the diet regimen that goes into it?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. The funny thing is you can definitely get away with eating more. So like, when you think about like when I'm in peak training, I'm about 140, 145 pounds. So like when I'm hitting like 20-hour training weeks and stuff like that, I might be burning like 2 to 3 times my resting metabolic rate. So step one is getting in enough energy so that you're making sure you're replacing what you're putting out there and able to kind of continue that progress without having too many hiccups from having like low energy and stuff like that and the symptoms that are going to come along for that ride. And then it's just like, well, what's going to get you there? So when I'm putting my body through that kind of rigor, it is important to get the right things versus just eating like random stuff, because I want to feel good on those workouts. So sometimes I think people look at it as it's like it's kind of a free pass to eat whatever you want, when in reality, I think when I start getting into that really, really high training side of things, I tend to get a little more picky just because I want to make sure I'm getting what's worked for me in the past and not sabotage my training by introducing foods that aren't necessarily going to work to my advantage. So it's less about just eating everything in sight and more about like eating enough of the right things. Endurance community in general, especially when you get into like Olympic distance sports, tends to skew more towards moderate to high carbohydrate. Ultra running, I think, is very kind of new to the research side of things, and it's also very low intensity, which just opens up a lot more doors. So things like fat sources tend to be a little more convenient in terms of being able to actually utilize them for a race that long and that slow intensity wise. That, you know, I tend to lean that direction for my diet. I tend to eat a little more higher fat, I don't restrict carbohydrates to a huge degree, like a strict ketogenic diet during like structured training, but they are quite low compared to a lot of other endurance athletes. So I'm always kind of looking at, well, what are the workouts I'm doing and what types of fuels are going to maybe supplement that. So if I'm doing short intervals, I'll have a little more carbohydrate around those days because those are going to be more glycolytic efforts. But then when I'm getting into kind of the peaking of a race, when I'm doing those long runs that are oftentimes lower intensity, I can, as long as I'm getting enough, I can get away with a lot more fat and fewer carbohydrates. And that's usually what I'm kind of doing going into that, is preparing my body to be able to burn very high amounts of fat at the intensity I race at, so I don't have to feel like I have to eat as much during the event itself. Because when you think about it, you kind of got two fuel tanks on race day. You have your glycogen stores. That's going to be a small fuel tank, but it's going to be really quick. Like you can call on that like in a split second and it's there for you. And then there's fat, which is going to take a little longer for your body to break down and use, but it is going to be very reliable. Even the leanest endurance athletes on the planet are going to have a way bigger fat fuel tank than a glycogen fuel tank. So that's one you don't have to really worry about replacing on race day. So I'm trying to get to myself to a point when I'm entering a 100-mile race where my ratios of fat being burnt to carbs being burnt at the intensity I race at is skewed pretty far towards fat, because then it means I just have to replace less of the small fuel tank glycogen on race day. The interesting thing is you get these long events. You've probably seen it with like triathlons and stuff like that. It's like there's a reason there's hundreds of porta potties on those courses. Like it's a disaster nutritionally. Like people, you know, I think it was I think they suggested it's like 50 to 60% of ultra runners are going to experience some sort of gastrointestinal type of issue during a race, is where the data is at the moment. So it basically is a coin flip as to whether you're going to deal with that or not. So for me, I want to minimize those uncertainties on race day. So I found that like if I stay at or below 40 grams of carbohydrate per hour on race day, it's pretty, unless I screw something else up, I'm probably not going to have a digestive issue. So if I can get my body to the point where it burns enough fat to supplement a strategy where I'm hitting like 30 to 40 grams of carbohydrate per hour, and that doesn't deplete my muscle glycogen so much that I'm running on fumes at the end, then that's great, because then I can almost eliminate the digestive side of the equation.
Yeah. Jeez. And do you like ever get bars or something? Like what do you eat during the race? Like the aid stations and stuff, they give you something?
Yeah, there's the aid stations. And then like I tend to, when I have a crew, I tend to just use my own stuff, because that I can kind of stress test during training a lot more strategically. So the way I like to do it though, especially when you get into these longer things like all day running, I like to kind of split it between kind of sports products and then solid foods. So the other nice thing about running slower for a long period of time is you can digest solid foods a little easier than like say elite marathoners when they're, you know, you get these guys running sub 5 minute mile pace for 26.2 miles. They're not going to eat a peanut butter and jelly sandwich during that.
No. Yeah. Right. God, even 26 miles is crazy to me, man. Like, no, this is cool. And do you have like a supplement routine as well? Cause like obviously supplements are such a big part of today's fitness world. And like, I wouldn't even know, maybe except something that probably break down like lactic acid buildup, but do you have like a supplement routine as well that goes into your training regimen?
Yeah, well, I'll try to like practice a little bit with the stuff I'm going to use on race day, so my body's kind of used to digesting it, and it's not like trying something new on race day. So I'll use a product called S Fuels Race Plus, is kind of the carbohydrate-based product that I'll supplement with during big workouts and races. And another one of the products, Train, is like a fat-based product. It's like a powder. It's basically like a sports drink, but fat-based versus carb-based. So if I want to keep the carbs a little low, but I want to bring fuel in, I'll turn to that. From like a micronutrient standpoint, I'll usually do a packet of Athletic Greens every day. So that's been
a bad boy right here.
Yeah. I've played around with different kind of.
I like their stuff, man. Helped me with a lot of like digestive tract issues that I was having, and that stuff is great. Yeah.
I'll usually take that stuff on an empty stomach, either in the morning or between meals during the day. And that's kind of a nice little like a security blanket, just to make sure I'm hitting all those micronutrients when I'm kind of going through the rigors of training and stuff like that. And I try to make sure I'm hitting all of my nutrients, both macro and micro, with my solid food nutrition. But you know how it is. It's like you travel, and then all of a sudden it's a little harder to do something like that.
So busy. Yeah. No, that's cool. So like with recovery, like if I ran that much, my legs would be fried. Obviously, you probably are a lot more accustomed to it, but like when it comes to recovery after like training and all that, like, you know, I would be willing to bet, like my only idea would just be like ice tubs and stuff, but I'm not too sure how you like avoid injury and things like that, because I would tear something immediately. But so like what goes into like the recovery aspect of it as well?
Yeah, I think one piece to the recovery side is making sure the training load is appropriate. So like no amount of recovery is going to make up for like going well above what you're capable of. And so a lot of times I think, especially early on in a training plan, when someone's like hyper motivated, they end up kind of overreaching a little bit too much. And then in order to kind of continue to execute the plan, they have to continue to overreach, and that leads to an injury and stuff like that. So for recovery, I think like I focus on kind of three things as kind of like the primary stuff. And then once I get those dialed in, I'll start bringing in things like compression, stretching, ice bath, sauna, and things like that. But the three things that I try to focus on first is making sure I get enough sleep, making sure I'm hitting, you know, for me, it's about 8 to 9 hours a night is kind of a sweet spot. If I can get that, I bounce back pretty quick. When I start dipping below that for, you know, a few days at a time is where I start to notice things like kind of lagging behind or little like injury type things starting to flare up. So sleep's a big one. Nutrition, which we kind of chatted about a bit, is another one I focus on quite a bit for recovery. You know, I aim to make sure I get high quality protein sources to go along with the carbs and fats I eat, which are going to fuel the workouts. The protein's going to help recover. So I try to make sure, one, I'm getting enough protein, and then two, when I'm in peak training, I try to space it out around at least 3, sometimes 4 periods during the day, so that I'm really hitting that like protein muscle synthesis every 3 to 4 hours, and just giving myself like kind of the best potential like scenario of bouncing back from any given workout. And then let's see, did I hit nutrition, sleep,
stretching and saunas and stuff?
Yeah, so then once I kind of have those key ones, the nutrition, the proper training load, and the recovery all matched up, then I'm the most of the way there. And then it's just like, how am I structuring my training? So the way I look at ice baths is they're really good at kind of getting some of that swelling out of my legs if I have like a big workout, and I'll oftentimes feel more ready for another workout after something like that. But you have to be careful too, because ice baths, as great as they can be, they can also kind of push off some of the inflammatory process a little bit. So I try to be mindful about kind of what's next. So if I have a scenario where I'm blocking workouts, like those back-to-back long runs, or if I'm earlier in the training plan and I'm doing short intervals, there's sometimes where I'll do those on back-to-back days. So if, let's say I have like short intervals on Monday and short intervals on Tuesday, and then an easy rest day on Wednesday, I might hit an ice bath after that run on Monday, so that I'm kind of feeling a little better for the Tuesday interval session and go hit that one. But then on that Wednesday rest day, I kind of want that swelling and some of that inflammatory process to take its place, because that's the recovery side of it. And then I'll maybe stay away from the ice bath for that rest day. But when I'm kind of trying to get from one workout to the next in a short period of time, I'll lean into stuff like that. Other things too, like
you ever done like cryotherapy?
I haven't done cryotherapy, but
I'll take you one of these days.
Yeah, I'll have to check that out.
There's one called restored cryotherapy that I've gone to. Yeah, they're really cool. Yeah, it's like I think they put you in for like 2 minutes tops, and it goes to like negative, I want to say, I could be wrong here, negative 160 degrees, and it freezes your body. And I think the purpose of it, I could be butchering it, is it freezes you so much that it forces blood flow to like your core to like re-up on like oxygen, and I don't know, kind of like cleans it. So when you do step out and you warm up, it like redisperses it to help with like, you know, recovery, and it breaks down lactic acid. But every time I've done it, I feel like I'm in a brand new body. It just sucks a lot for the first that 2 minutes you're in there, because they give you socks, like these slippers, gloves, and a robe, but you have to give them the robe when you get in. So you're just in there in like your underwear and gloves, and you're just freezing, and it sucks, but it's really cool though. It's yeah, I'll take you one of these days. We'll go do it. It's a lot of fun. So
yeah, it'll be fun to check out.
Yeah, no, that's great. So with that, you know, one of the other things I was thinking about when we went and grabbed we went to watch the Packers game. I was thinking random things, and one of them was like what goes through your mind when you're running like 100 miles? Like, how do you not get bored? Like, you know, how do you like stay motivated? Like, because you like listen to music while you're doing it too. Like, I'm assuming you probably have an iPod or something.
Yeah. I'll use music kind of intermittently throughout. What I try to be careful not to kind of overuse it early on, so that it's kind of a useful tool that is still motivating when it gets real tough at the end. But I'll definitely use that. Also, like I think chunking the race helps a lot too. Like if you go in thinking continuously throughout the day, I'm running 100 miles today, I'm running 100 miles today, I'm running 100 miles today, it like digs into your mental bandwidth to the point where at the end you're just like so sick of thinking about running 100 miles, you don't got anything else to give at that point. So I like to kind of break it into stages. So when I get to one, I can feel like, okay, that's checked off the list. I'm accomplishing something. Now I got to just tackle this. And they're always kind of more.
Today's episode is brought to you by Avatar Nutrition. It is always a treat to show some love to our sponsor, Avatar Nutrition. Avatar is actually owned by my friend Mark, who is a lifting buddy of mine from the gym. What I didn't realize at the time is that his app has been used by close to 200,000 people, and they've used it to lose over 2.5 million pounds of pure body fat. What's really special about Avatar is that it's a complete service delivered through a super easy-to-use app. See, Avatar is the OG in the macros game and created a process that makes counting macros both fun and simple to stick to long-term. You've got unlimited support from their community and experts on staff, and they are in the business of giving their clients results that last. Try it free on the App Store or Google Play Store for 2 weeks, and if you love it as much as I do, it's just $9.99 a month after that, or $97.99 for the annual rate if you want even more of a discount. If you're a coach, trainer, or you own any kind of business and want to use Avatar to facilitate game-changing nutrition coverage for your people, Avatar is a program for groups too. Just contact them through their website to learn more at www.avatarnutrition.com.
Manageable numbers versus 100. So that works really well for me. And then the other thing I've been doing more recently with my workouts is rather than thinking about them just purely as this is a physiological training thing to get me ready, you get my body ready, is like how can I also use it to get my mind ready? So if I'm doing, say, a 30-mile long run, I'm thinking about, okay, let's pretend at the start of this run, I'm 70 miles into a 100-mile run. What do I need to be kind of focusing on and thinking about and staying on top of for that final 30 miles? And what that helps with is when I get to that point in the race, instead of thinking like, oh man, I got 70 miles in my legs and 30 miles to go and just like dwelling on that, I'm thinking about one more long run. And that's something that's kind of close proximity in my mind because I did so many of them leading into the race itself. It's less about kind of pulling from whatever race I did previously at that point.
That's so great. Yeah, I do that too, though. If I have like 100 reps, I'll break it into 10s or something. Like, all right, I just did 10, but
chunk it.
That's crazy. Yeah, man, running 100 miles. So you were telling me you only do that like you don't run 100 miles for every training though. It's just you usually like how many times a year will you usually do like 100 miles?
Yeah, I like to do. I mean, I've done years where I haven't run 100 miles, and I've done some where I've gone in. I'm trying to think of the most 100 milers I've done a year, maybe 3, I think. So usually I like 2 though. 2 is a pretty clean number for me because it's like I can kind of divide the year into 2 6-month chunks, and then I can sprinkle in some 50K to 100Ks in the lead up to that, and then kind of peak for the 100-miler, take a little bit of an off season, build back up, and do it again near the end of the year. So it kind of ends up being 2 seasons in 1 year. That's the way I kind of like to do it the most when the races I choose are kind of convenient with that time frame. But sometimes you get issues or scenarios where like you pick an A race and things just don't go well for one reason or the other, and it doesn't necessarily destroy your body the way it would have if you had really left it out there. So you can squeeze in another A race in there. So some years just present themselves a little bit better to be able to race a little more, and others you need to kind of back off a little, make sure it's sustainable. So I've always just kind of listened to my body and just tried to decide, like, am I really ready physically and mentally to take on another build-up and another race? And usually it takes me maybe a couple weeks after whatever race I had just done to kind of answer that question. But once I have the answer to that, I kind of have a path forward.
Do you pick your races too based off like location? Like if it's higher elevation, would you stay away from it, or do you just train for it? Is there like a specific process, or like are you really picky on where you would go and compete?
Yeah, the way I like to do it is my kind of primary event, the one I'm most excited about, the one that kind of motivates me the most is like flat controllable 100 milers. So those are usually the ones I'm focusing on. And then what happens a lot of times is like you do a few of those and you start to kind of lose a little bit of the edge because it's just like kind of the same thing over and over again. And when I get to that point where I'm kind of starting to lose a little bit of that kind of excitement and edge from it, I'll switch to something completely different and do like a 100-miler on the trails or something completely different, like something overseas, maybe a race that's got a completely different kind of characteristic about it. That's going to change the training environment and the training structure enough that I don't feel like I'm kind of doing the same thing again. And usually after about like 4 to 6 months of that, I've kind of reset and I take an off season, then I can kind of get excited about doing a flat runnable 100 again. So I definitely do more of those, but when I do find times to kind of deviate from it in order to keep it exciting.
So are these both flat or even the trails, like, is it kind of like a straight shot or do they often do like laps? Or are you lapping?
Yeah, you get a little bit of everything. You get point-to-point races where you start one area and end in another. You get some where it's a 400-meter track where you see the whole thing after the first couple minutes.
Oh, yeah.
And then you have like looped courses too. So like some of them you'll have like 20-mile loops. Others they'll be really short loops like 400 meters, a mile, 2 miles, things like that. Or sometimes you get real big loops, like it's a couple 50-mile loops and stuff like that. Or sometimes you'll have a course too, like the Ultra Trail Mont Blanc over in Chamonix is like, it's just like a big loop. I think it's technically almost 105 miles, but yeah, that one is just like a big circle essentially. So you get a little bit of everything. If you like certain types better than others, you can kind of focus on those.
Yeah. That was like one of the things I was most curious about. I was like, man, if he's doing like, is it going to be flat or do you go in circles or something? Because I know that, I plan on going to do a run with you here soon. And I was like, where are we going to run to? Like sanitary, more like a 1-miler. Yeah.
Drop a couple zeros.
Yeah, right. I'll be dropping more before those zeros. They so do you have to get like, is there like a specialized like shoes or anything you have to wear going into these, or or you can't just buy like regular New Balance shoes at at Ross?
Yeah, you can. I mean, there's definitely like kind of more of a running specific type of shoe, and then you are going to probably pick a type based on the terrain. So I would wear something different for like a track ultra than I would for like a technical trail. So for shoes in general though, I like to kind of look at it as like different tools for different things. So when I'm building up for a race, I'll have usually a few different pairs of shoes that I'm kind of rotating through. So some are going to be maybe a little more low profile, a little more responsive that I'll use for like say speed workout days. And then some might be a little more kind of soft, like soft step in feel that I might use for like recovery days or days where like my lower legs feel a little more beat up, things like that. For me specifically, I work with a company called Ultra Footwear, and they make a shoe that's called balanced cushioning. So the front and the back of the shoe are the same distance off the ground. Most shoes in general are actually kind of tilted a little bit like a down ramp towards your toes. And I think that just more or less is going to likely put you in a mechanical position that your body's not meant to be in. And you can adapt to it for sure, and a lot of people have, but I think if you can readapt to being able to kind of be on that balanced flat platform, regardless of whether it's balanced close to the ground or balanced and with a bunch of cushion in between, is less important to me. It's important depending on the terrain and what I'm trying to use it for, but in terms of putting me in the right biomechanical position, I like that balanced, whether it's a like max cushion shoe, which is like 30 to 36 millimeters on a lot of products, or like really low profile kind of minimalist where you're getting down to like maybe 15 millimeters of cushion. They're all on that flat platform. And they also make a foot shaped toe box, which I love because like toenails are just like get destroyed in these long runs.
What are those? What do you mean
foot shaped? So if
like the actual toed shoes?
Yeah. So that would be kind of an example of that. The problem with some of the toe shoes are just like if you do want to articulate your toes, you don't necessarily want them to be able to individually be exposed though. I mean, it's about anything. Like if you're willing to put in the work and the time to kind of get used to it, you make it work. But the Ultras shoes, they don't have the toes. They just the actual box that the toes would be under, instead of kind of like curving into a point like you see with a lot of shoes, they actually wrap around your foot the way your foot is formed. So if you like look at a foot, like if I throw my foot up here, it kind of look like an upside down triangle to a degree where it gets narrowed down by the heel and then it kind of gets wider as you go up to the toes. Most shoes kind of like flare out a little by the heel, taper in around the midfoot, and then flare out a little bit on the toe box, then ultimately kind of come to a point. And that point, what it does is it kind of puts that small toe and that big toe, kind of pushes them together. That's why you see like people who are in like really restrictive shoes, sometimes they look like they'll have a bunion essentially because they'll take their toe and it points it in, it gets used to being there. Ugh. And I don't like that for a few reasons. One is that compression along the toes is just going to create an environment that's more conducive to blistering and stuff like that, especially when you're out there all day long. And then when you're toeing off on a run or jumping or anything like that, you want that big toe relaxed and straight. So if it's getting pointed in, you could compromise like that output because most of your power is going to come pushing off of that big toe. So that foot-shaped toe box helps with that too. So there's kind of like a comfort, a balance, and a performance aspect to that type of a design that I really like. And then it's just picking the right one for the job, so to speak. And shoes in general within the running community have been kind of a bit of a hot topic the last few years because technology's essentially changed. It's kind of similar to, if you remember, when cycling switched from like steel frame bikes to carbon fiber bikes, or swimming went the opposite direction. They had that speed suit that came out for a while that people were breaking all the records with, and then they said this is too much of a technological advantage. We're going to eliminate.
What are those?
It was like this suit you would wear that kind of kept you a little more buoyant, I think. Oh. So like people were just more efficient swimming with it. Like it was less resistance.
Sounds like they're cheating.
Yeah. Well, it's like a mechanical doping is essentially what they call it. Yeah. And it becomes like a topic because it's like, does everyone have access to it? And if everyone has access to it, is it fair? Yeah. Kind of a thing. The shoe stuff, running, most people thought running was somewhat protected from that because it's like how much technological advantage can you get? And around, I think 2016 is when we started to see some prototypes that Nike came out with, that they made like a midsole compound that when you step down into it, it has a much greater energy return than traditional midsole foams did. So
kind of like the Jordan pumps.
Yeah. It's kind of that idea, but it actually worked.
Oh yeah, right. Yeah, that never worked for me. I still can't dunk. No, that's cool. So do you prefer like laced or do you want them unlaced? Because like I can't imagine like you run and all of a sudden your shoes untie. That would drive me nuts.
You want to make sure you have it. I mean, I think this is a little bit of a preference thing. Some people want to have the thing locked down on their foot. Sometimes it just depends on where I'm running. Like if I'm doing a lot of downhill technical running, I probably want it a little more snug, at least on the back half of the shoe, so I don't feel like I'm like slamming up into the front of the shoe or sliding around in there and creating like potential blisters from that rubbing. If it's like a flatter run though, sometimes I like it a little more loose because like then you don't feel like it's getting tight if your feet swell. Or I usually don't have an issue with feet swelling during an event, maybe a little more so after, but some people will get like a point where their race shoe, they'll get a half a size bigger because they just know by the end it's going to be swollen to the point where that's what they're going to need, or they'll change into a shoe. That's the other thing. Like sometimes a reason to stop would be to change shoes or something like that. So some people would have like, say they're a size 10, they'll start out in a size 10, but at mile 50, they'll change into another pair of shoes that's like a 10.5 because they're just going to have some swelling in it. And
that's smart. No, yeah, my feet definitely swell up. I always make sure to get like a half a size bigger just because they'll naturally go up. And so with you, when it comes to shoes, because obviously shoes are a very important aspect of running because that's like the tires for your feet. So do you like do you use the same shoes that you were training in, or do you get brand new ones leading into a race? Like, do you have a preference? Because
yeah, sometimes it depends on the model. Some are just a little more nimble out the box, and those ones you can kind of just throw in and go with them. But usually, even if it's something like that, I'll put them on for a few miles at least before the race itself. It's a little bit of a balance because 100 miles is pretty.
Today's episode is brought to you by CBD Online Xpress. CBD Online Xpress is a fresh, up-and-coming CBD company that strives to offer the highest quality products at an affordable price to help you in your everyday life. They offer a variety of products such as tinctures, edibles, flour, and even their new recreational line, Oxed Up. They also have plans to introduce water and an energy drink later this year. Go to cbdonlineexpress.com and get your products today.
Long ways, most shoes are kind of built to be pretty durable for about 300 to 500 miles. So I don't necessarily want to like start with a pair that's got 400 miles on them, or I might end up with a malfunction or something like that.
All of a sudden they're ripping apart.
Yeah, so I'll usually put maybe like 15, 20 miles on it just to make sure that there's nothing goofy with that particular pair that for whatever reason, and make sure it's doing the same thing that the last pair did, and iron all that out. But generally speaking, the shoe model I'm going to race in, I'm going to be using during the long runs that I'm doing in that last few weeks leading into it, just so I'm kind of used to everything about that shoe and my mechanics are kind of adjusted to it.
Yeah. So yeah, I got to imagine how important those are. They, so kind of switching gears. So you were not always doing ultra marathons, you were saying that because you're originally from Wisconsin, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And probably not a lot of time to run up there because of the seasons and it's freezing. So what did you do any other sports that eventually led into that? Because like I know you said like you went all the way into college with it. So what were some of the stuff you were doing prior to getting into ultramarathon running, like specifically sports and that general?
Yeah, I started getting interested in running maybe a little later. I did like all sorts of sports when I was in middle school and even a little bit in high school before I started deciding like running is the one I want to really focus my time and energy on. So, and I did all of them in middle school: football, basketball, baseball, you name it, soccer. And then I want to say middle school, I first got exposed to distance running through Presidential Physical Fitness Challenge. And then ultimately track and field day was kind of like the sign for me, like, oh, I can either get my ass kicked in the 100-meter dash or I can win the mile. It's like when you're 12 years old, you know what to pick.
Yeah. Yeah, you kind of find your niche after a while.
Right.
Yeah.
So that kind of, my freshman year in high school, my family moved, so I was in a whole new place, made all new friends and stuff like that. And I ended up playing tackle football my freshman year during the cross-country season. So I didn't run cross-country. And I learned during the track, or I should probably say I was reminded during the track season that distance running was a little bit of a better direction for me. So then by my sophomore year, I was doing basically I did basketball my sophomore year, but it was cross country, basketball, track. And then going into my junior year, I don't think I had started training year round yet at that point. Junior year, I was cross country and track. And then senior year was when I was like, okay, time to take this a little more serious, run year round, stay fit in the off season, that kind of stuff. And then by the time I got to college and started running, I ran for a D3 school, University of Wisconsin, Stevens Point.
Oh, cool.
And they're a highly competitive D3 school. So I was very much like mediocre amongst those guys. And that's
Are they more known for running as a running track school?
Yeah, there's a conference. So Wisconsin's kind of an interesting setup. You wouldn't think of it, but it is a big running state. Like
really?
It's got very competitive high school track and cross country and competitive collegiate schools. So UW-Madison is the D1 school there, and they've historically had really competitive track and cross country programs. Then when you get down to the D3 side, they have this conference called the WEAC conference. And the WEAC conference has like a handful of schools that are all Wisconsin based, and they always do well at nationals. There'll be years where like the team that wins the conference doesn't even win nationals, but another team from the conference that they beat wins nationals. So it's really kind of cool how it ends up playing out. So I was in an environment where it was really kind of conducive for me to learn, because it wasn't like the stress of a D1 program where it was like, here's a scholarship. You've prioritized this, and if your academics fade in the process, you worry about that after your scholarship's done.
Yeah.
This was more like, okay, you can come and run for us, but stay eligible and prioritize education.
We don't care about the grades. Just make sure you're passing so you can compete. Yep.
Yeah. So there was a little more incentive to like take your education as the priority, but also take running seriously. And there's a little more flexibility within that program, and that was good for me, I think, because I wasn't probably ready to take it entirely seriously yet the way I do now. And it gave me an opportunity to really learn, because in high school I more or less just said, all right, the coach says do this, I'll do that. Yeah. And no more, no less. In college it was like, I want to know why we're doing this and understand it and figure out like, are there workouts that for me at the individual level produce more gains than other workouts, so that I have like strengths and weaknesses and really understand that stuff. So I spent most of my college years kind of figuring that out and kind of basically really starting to take running seriously and catching up with some of my peers in that regard. And that's kind of where I identified that the long run was kind of my favorite workout of the week. And that kind of led to the ultra running stuff.
Oh, that's awesome. So do you have plans for like you're going to do another competition here soon?
Yeah, I think there's a race in June. So in 2019, when I ran 11 hours and 19 minutes for 100 miles, it's like a 6:47.5 minute mile pace. Yeah. And I did it at this place up in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. They have an Olympic training facility there that was built for speed skating, essentially. They built a speed skating rink was the primary purpose. They threw like, I think 3 hockey rinks in the middle. And then they're like, this is a huge facility. We may as well put a track around the speed skating rink too. And it was such a big facility, though. The track, they had the opposite problem of most indoor places, where it's hard to get it up to 400 meters like an outdoor track. So they deviate to like a 200-meter track is pretty typical for indoor tracks. This one was so big that the smallest they could get it was like 438 meters. So, which is still a lot of loops. I think it was like 368 loops, if I remember right, for 100 miles. And but it's a hockey rink, speed skating rink, so they keep it at 60 degrees. So it's really convenient from a logistical standpoint and a performance standpoint. So I think I'm going to head back there. They're doing that one in June this year with a target of just trying to see how fast I can run 100 miles. But I'd like to do like some tune-up races leading into it. 2020 was a crazy year with the pandemic, so there wasn't a lot of racing there. 2021 was just weird because I had an injury that I've been really fortunate with injuries. I've really only had one other injury other than last year since I started ultra running, but that kind of made it a little light on the racing last year. So this year I'd like to kind of get back to a little more of a structure where I'm doing like maybe 2 or 3 races leading into my goal race, resetting, 2 or 3 races leading into a goal race, and at the end of the year having like 6 or 7 races under my belt, but maybe 2 priority ones. So I'd like to do some of that. So I'll probably do some local ones here in Texas just to kind of check out that scene. Texas actually has a couple pretty decent ultramarathon running race organizations that offer a lot of options. So there's a lot to find even within the state.
Shoot, and we could put one on.
Yeah,
it'd be fun.
Heck yeah,
I'm down for that.
Send people out for 12 hours.
Yeah, right. Be like, have fun. I'll go home. Come check it out later. Yeah.
Just put a table, some food, and some drinks on.
Yeah. Like, all right, I'll be back. Yeah, let me know how it goes. Yeah. No. So you were saying that you were the you had, past tense, the world record. Mm-hmm. And so someone has been, I think you were telling me, has been just like killing it lately in Lithuania or something.
Yeah. Alex Sorkin, he's got a really fun story actually. It's, he's been in the sport for a while. He's 40 now, so he's a bit older than me, but like most people had no clue who he was for the most part, at least in the United States. I'm sure people like kind of over in his area were probably more aware of him, and people who follow the timed event stuff and like the Spartathlon's this big 153-mile race over in Greece that's really popular, and he had won that previously, but he hadn't won them with like big record-breaking performances up until this last year. I think what ended up happening is during the pandemic, I think his job situation changed a bit. So he just, and there was a lot of lockdown type stuff. So he just like kind of put his head down and trained really aggressively and went out and ran a world record for the 100 mile in 12 hours. It would have been April last year. And then a few months later went and broke the 24-hour world record, which was considered one of the most unbreakable records in the sport. There's a guy named Yannis Kouros who holds a lot of the like kind of flat runnable type records, especially when you get like beyond 100 miles. And he had a 24-hour world record for quite a while. He broke that one, ran, I think it was 192.5 miles in 24 hours, which comes out to like a 7.5 minute mile pace for 24 straight hours. So everyone was like, all right, that's a pretty good year. He broke the 12-hour world record, the 24-hour world record, the 100-mile world record. It's like he's probably done for the year.
Is this guy a robot?
Yeah, and then at the very end of the year, he went and ran 100 miles at an event in 10 hours and 51 minutes is what they have it listed at now. I think it might actually end up being officially faster than that because the way they had it set up is it was like a course where it was like about a mile loop. And the way they were recording that day is you have to complete a lap in order to count towards your total. And it was like, so it was a little over a mile, I think is what the thing was. So he finished a lap that was like 99.5 miles his total was at. So they weren't going to give him a finishing time for 100 miles till he finished that next lap, which was more like 105 or 100.5 or 100.6 or something like that. So he crossed that last lap at 10 hours and 51 minutes. But once they go back and measure where he actually hit 100 miles, it'll probably be closer to 10:48. So he's the first person to break 11 hours in the 100 mile. And now it's like the bar is like just that much higher. Right. So it'll be fun to see if
you're going to go compete against him.
I'd love to race him at some point. I think, he's over in Lithuania, so we'd have to figure out a good spot to kind of meet up. Bring
him out here.
Yeah. I'm sure he'd love to. And I think we'll end up at a race together at some point. I think it'd be fun. So, yeah, so June I'll take a big shot at fast 100-mile time, see what happens there, and then.
Well, I guess you guys can kind of compete anyways, just through timing. Like it's not like a full head-to-head race.
Yeah,
necessarily.
That's a nice thing about kind of the short loop, controllable environments is they are a little more comparable because even when you get like a race that is as well known as like the Western States 100 or Ultra Trail Mont Blanc, which are probably the two most competitive 100-milers in the world, you might have a year where at Western States it's in the 80s in the canyon section, which is a really like kind of brutal like climbing section in that course, and then just years where it's well over 100 degrees in there. So like you run at the year where it's 80s in the canyons versus the year it's 110 in the canyons, you're going to have a lot different. You might be 2 to 3 hours slower one year versus the other. Whereas you're on a track, as long as you control for like weather and a lot of those other things, chances are if you have a similar performance, you're going to be within minutes of what you did a prior year. Or if someone ran on a track with reasonable weather in 1980, it's pretty comparable to what you'd be able to do in 2010 or 2020. And really the biggest difference between what is kind of emerging now and what you'd see historically with those is just the shoe technology stuff. So there's a big enough advantage with that where over 100 miles, we're talking 20, maybe 30 minutes to some degree if you have the right shoe tech. So some of the old timers are probably maybe a little upset about that.
Right? Like, we didn't get any of this. Yeah. So are there there's not really an end date on ultramarathon, right? Like, no one, I guess, is there really a retirement age that people hit, or is it just kind of, they just keep going and going?
Yeah, it's interesting. I think when I got into the sport, it seemed like the sweet spot for 100 milers was almost in your 40s, or you'd see a lot of the top finishers would be well into their 30s. And I think a lot of that was just people didn't necessarily jump right into 100 milers as a career. They ended up doing a full kind of round of probably collegiate running, then some marathon running, some road racing. They'd really kind of whittle down their performance there. And by the time they got around to running a 50 miler or 100 miler, they were already mid 30s, early 40s, where it was a scenario where they had exhausted their previous stuff. The sport's grown a ton since I started running it in 2010, and part of the kind of the transition there has been you'll see D1 collegiate athletes getting into ultramarathons in their 20s and stuff like that. So it's just gotten a lot more competitive, a lot more deep, and you get a little bit more of a focus on that sport. So now that age has come down from when people are typically peaking. But, I say that in a year where a guy broke a 100-mile, 12-hour, and 24-hour record all in 12 or 10-month time frame, and he's 40 years old. So, so clearly you can still be relatively old and do well at these things. And I think part of that's just the low intensity of race day. You don't necessarily have to have that pop that you need when you're doing 3Ks, 5Ks, and things like that. And you also have all that experience from previous years that you kind of really figured out what works for you at that point. And so it's probably just pushed back a little bit.
Do you have any end time, post competition plans?
Yeah, I mean, I'm just gonna get as buff as I can as soon as
Started training with Leroy. We were talking about.
I'm going for that. I'm going for that strict curl.
Strict curl world. What does he have? What does he have, Marlon? What was it? 260. I think he's curled 265 pounds or something.
That's wild.
That's insane. Yeah, I plan on having him on.
Guy?
I know there's a guy that it was a Russian. He beat this guy's record, and now they're gonna go head to head at the Arnold, which is in March. And so I know he talked to us about that. He invited us up. We should go. Yeah. And I think he only beat it. I can't remember what the actual weight is. I'll have to look it up. It was 260 or 255 pounds.
Yeah, they talk about it in kilos, so you have to do
kilos weight. I don't know. I'm still learning everything as I go. You know, with all this too, people think I'm some guru, and I'm dude, I'm dumb as shit. I don't. I'm learning it as I go too. That's, I'm excited though for all this because I get to meet all these cool people and ask them.
It's fun then because it's not I'm going to hear this person tell a story I've heard a million times and then I'm going to put it up for everyone else who's new to hear it. But.
Well, no one knew I actually had this. I just announced it. When I announced the show, it was actually the first time I ever went public with it. And so, no, it's been exciting. But yeah, no, I'm definitely, I say I'm a chapter 1 guy. I've read the first chapter of a book, so I kind of have an idea of what we're talking about, but no, not at all a crazy fit educator. I don't do diets or training or any of that. I'm just a dude that scored and, lucky enough to get to meet a lot of high profile athletes, which by the way, man, I've met a ton of famous and high profile, professional athletes. And I was telling Marlon here that I think you might be the nicest one. Every time we've hung out and everything, everyone gravitates to you and is they, I've never met someone that's so personable and relatable and just sits and BS's with people. And even when we were hanging out Saturday at that event, everyone enjoyed hanging out and talking to you. So that was pretty cool. I've enjoyed our time together so far. And, I'm excited for all the future stuff coming up as well. And, kind of back on course with what we were talking about. So during 2020, they had kind of shut everything down out here. All the gyms were closed. Everything was like that. And did that at all affect you as far as your training, or did you just keep running? You were I'm not stopping. I'm going to keep going outside and running.
Yeah, the funny thing is, so there's a race over in the UK in London called the Centurion 100, and it's probably the best setup for 100-mile specific, like time chasing from one. So let me back up a second. Like all these 100-milers I've done on a track, the biggest hurdle that I haven't been able to kind of control for yet is the responsibility of the person passing is to go out into the second lane or the third lane or whatever lane you need to get around. It's not the person in front's responsibility. And part of that's just logistics. Like you can't really expect someone to know you're coming up behind them. And especially some people have like a real light tread too. So it's like you wouldn't even know they're coming up. And then you had a situation where they're trying to move out of the way while you're moving out of the way. And it just gets confusing. So they tell everyone to stay in lane one. And if you're passing, you move out and pass. So most of these events I've done this at have been like within a 24-hour event or a 48-hour event or sometimes a 6-day event. So you get a lot of folks out there who are trying to see how far they can run in a much longer time frame than I'm targeting. So they're going to have to go slower just to make it sustainable. So I'm passing, like you get 30, sometimes 40 people out on that track, spreads out a little bit. I end up in lane 2 basically the entire time.
Oh, yeah.
So really, like when I ran 11:19 for 100 miles, I probably ran closer to 101, maybe 102 miles. Just from the amount of time you spend in lane 2 and 3 during a day like that. The Centurion 100, the cool thing about that is it's built for 100-mile stuff. So, and there's like time standards. So there's just a lot faster movement on the track. So a lot less passing happening in general. Now, granted, that's an outdoor track and the weather can be a little more volatile in the UK. So like the advantage of the Pettit Center, even with the lane 2 stuff, is you get that climate control side of things. I expect as it gets more popular, they'll start kind of controlling for that too and give more opportunities. But anyway, back to the original question is like in 2020, I was preparing for that event. It's in April.
Okay. Yeah.
And then it got canceled, I want to say at some point in March. Mid-March, they were like, all right, yeah, this is for real. We can't justify doing this. And and they canceled it. So I had been, that would have been like 4 or 5 weeks out from the race itself. So I was pretty close to finishing the training for that. You usually like a full buildup for a race is going to be like somewhere between 4 to 6 months. And once I get maybe 2 weeks out, I start tapering. So I start reducing volume and intensity. So if you're 5 weeks out, you've really only got like that last block of training to do to be ready for it. So when that got canceled, I was sitting in a position where like I'm ready to race pretty soon here, but I got no races to do. So I ended up setting up a situation where I worked with NordiTrack. Actually, we put a couple treadmills in my house, and I live streamed a 100-mile treadmill.
Oh, cool!
Ran 100 miles in 12 hours and 9 minutes, I think. And yeah, in 12 hours went 98.5 miles and live streamed it. We had like Bert Kreischer come on. The live stream is pretty cool. Yeah.
He wasn't running, I bet.
No. Although he does do some running.
Does he really?
He just does some wine drinking while he's doing it.
Like a different kind of. Yeah, no, that's cool. Yeah, I would love to see him and you guys run together. That'd be so funny.
Yeah. So I did that. And then like the rest of the year was kind of still touch and go with races, even in the back half. I ended up I signed up and participated in a 24-hour, and that's just an event I've done a few times over my career. One time I prepared for it seriously. The other 2 times I kind of just jumped in it, and none of them have gone well. None of them have gone well at all. They're probably, if I had to list like my worst races, those 3 would probably be close to the worst in most cases. So that's one I'm really excited about that event, and it's one I think I'll be good at when I can kind of figure out the code for it. But that was the second half of 2020 was basically a blow up at that. So I didn't really have a whole lot of racing outside of that treadmill thing that year. And then 2021 was I won the USATF 100-mile road championships in April, and then I was going to do the cross country run, the transcontinental from San Francisco to New York, which is like a 3,000-mile route basically, and the record for that is like 72.5 miles per day. This guy Pete Kostelnick ran it in about 6 weeks exactly, 42 days and 6 hours.
just Forrest Gumped it.
Forrest Gumped it. He has an RV following him around. Yeah, it's pretty wild. So I was going to actually do that route at the back half of 2021, and I injured my ankle like literally like right like a month before the start. So I was like, I had to kind of sideline that one because you can't go into something like that not 100%, or it's gonna like you're gonna hurt yourself doing that type of project. It's not really a question of if; it's a question of when and how you manage it, or can you manage it. And like you go in with something wrong, like even if that doesn't flare up on you, you're probably going to at some point be favoring something because of it and hurt that then. So just with so many people involved in it, it wasn't something, that I could justify doing if I wasn't 100%. So I had to cancel that. And that didn't end my entire year. I ended up doing one more race just to kind of at the very end of the year in order to test where my ankle was at. And that went well. So that kind of confirmed to me that I'm ready to kind of put in a big training block for what's coming up this year.
Okay. So 2020, or basically the whole COVID thing hasn't really like derailed you from what you're trying to do. Cause has that put like kind of an impact on traveling as far as competing in different countries against other people?
For sure. Yeah. And my wife and I actually were over in New Zealand for a race right before the pandemic happened. So like no one really knew about it. No one was actually like talking about it really, not in the United States anyway, when we were over there. And then we got back and literally like a couple weeks later, everything blew up. So it was like
crazy. It was crazy times.
So everything locked down after that. Yeah. There's I'm trying to think. I haven't left the country since then. I don't think I have. So, so that was the last international race. The next one I would potentially do, there's World 100Ks is in Berlin, Germany this year. It's scheduled for late August, so I'd have to still get a qualifier for it. So some of it's subjective as to whether I can go and do that between now and then assuming it actually happens. The World Championship races are pretty fickle in that they oftentimes get canceled for lesser reasons than most events would get canceled. So
even prior to COVID and stuff?
Yeah, they're just a little more finicky with it because it's really expensive to put one on. So like sometimes these and they usually try to tie themselves to an existing race. So if this race can't produce the finances to really pull it off, they sometimes get drowned out on it and have to cancel if they can't find another venue. And you traveling in athletes from around the world, you can't really change a venue in like a couple of weeks or people are going to get angry and it just won't work.
Just cancel out and then it.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And so do they ever do those here though? The world?
They have in the past, I think. I'm trying to remember. I want to say they've had them maybe over in California once, like way before I ever competed. But I could be wrong about that. Usually, there's a few places that have kind of been I guess you'd call it proof of concept, where they're like, oh, we've done them here before and it worked well, so we know we can work with this race organization. So like Winschoten, Netherlands is a spot where I think they've hosted like 5 times just because they've got a really good venue for it. They've proven that they're able to have the infrastructure for it and things like that. But I've done it in Doha, Qatar, in Spain, the Netherlands, and I think those are 3 that I did World 100Ks at. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
That's nuts.
Doha was interesting because
where's that at?
Doha, Qatar, so it's over in the Middle East and super humid. So like luckily it was like after the worst of the weather for the year. But it was still so hot there that they started at 6 at night to make sure it wasn't like outrageous.
Dude, how do you prepare yourself for like that part? Like that's the thing that blows my mind is like, say you train here and then you got to go travel and it's like, do they ever cancel events? Like if it's too hot or if there's rain, like if it's storming, or is it like, all right, you're here, best of luck,
Pretty much. Yeah. There's when you're traveling internationally for a race, there's a huge component to just like, managing your nutrition. Like you might be exposed to a lot of different foods that you maybe weren't having before. So trying to make sure you don't get too crazy with that. The weather component. I mean, at World 100Ks in 2015, I actually ended up in a hospital before.
Oh shit! What happened?
It was so like I was actually really fit for that one. So I almost, that's one I wish I could go back and do again. But I had like a weird like allergic reaction, I think, to like some sort of like pollen that happened to be there that wasn't in California where I was living at the time. And I ended up like progressively throughout that race losing like I wasn't losing my ability to breathe, but it was like by the end of it, I was breathing through a straw is what it felt like.
Oh God.
So at around 50 miles into what was a 62.5 mile race, I stopped and like leaned up against a tree to catch my breath. And, like they were like so on top of things there, almost like maybe a little too much so. Like next thing I knew it, I was in an ambulance and they had me in the hospital and they wanted me to stay overnight actually because they did a bunch of like stress tests on my, like heart and all that stuff just to make sure there wasn't anything there. And I mean, I just ran 50 miles, so it's like everything's gonna be wonky after that. Like, nothing's gonna come back clean from just like the way that your heart is behaving and things like that. There's just a certain amount of like damage you're going to do from an event like that. So luckily we had a team doctor and he was there with me. So he's like, he looked at his scan. He's like, this is nothing surprising given what he just did. I think he'll be fine. We'll keep an eye on him. So I didn't have to stay overnight, thankfully. But But that one ended a little earlier than I would have liked. So
yeah, I can imagine. I mean, that's kind of like the main point. You got to breathe to run.
Tough. It's tough to run low 6 minute pace when you're not
breathing through a straw. Yeah. Yeah. So is there any other sports that you wouldn't mind participating in the future? Or is it just strictly ultra marathon? Cause I know you have the trails and the flat ones, but are there any like more track based events that you do too? Like short distance
stuff. Yeah, I you know what? I swear I say this every year, and the pandemic certainly didn't help with this, but like I would love to do more short stuff like 5Ks, 10Ks, not necessarily as a primary thing, but as a way to get like a really good workout in. So like a lot of times, I'll be doing speed work kind of early on in my training plan. So by like when I'm about maybe a third to a halfway through it, I'm actually fairly fit for some of the shorter stuff. Mm-hmm. So I'd like to kind of leverage that fitness during a build up and jump in some of that stuff and just see like, what I can do for those. Cause I think a lot of my PRs at like the 5K, 10K, certainly the marathon and half marathon are like probably quite a bit slower than what I could do with a proper build up. I just kind of mostly I left them too early, realistically speaking. Like, when I was 24, switching to ultra marathons, that's pretty young for someone to transition from like a 5K, 10K and think that they got everything out of it. So I'm pretty sure I can go faster in a lot of those events, and it'd be kind of fun to do it. But I probably have to start doing that. I'm 36, so it's like those distances are a little more time sensitive. Yeah. So when I'm in my mid 40s, I'm not going to be PRing in the 5K. So it's probably got to be sooner rather than later.
Yeah. Do you have like specific strengths and weaknesses that you try to like strategize off of? Like, is there like a specific speed you have to go at that you're like, all right, I'm here, I've hit this level, like let's maintain this? Or I imagine there's a strategy that goes into each race. Like, are you allowed to go train on, like, if it's a trail one, can you go and train there if, like, say you live there, if they do one here, or is there like rules against that? No,
you can, and some people will do that. So like, if they don't live in there, like some people, they'll move out to the race course like a month or two ahead of time so they can do their final block on the course and really learn it. I think it's not a bad idea, but it's not necessarily a universal win for most people. I think the big win for a lot of people is getting on terrain similar to what they're going to see on the course, but not necessarily the course itself. I think you want to see the course if you can. That's going to be helpful. But if you're out there for like, the way I look at it is if I'm out there for like 6 weeks before the race and just running on that particular trail day after day after day, there may be a little bit of like fatigue from that particular route that you don't necessarily want on race day. You still want it to be kind of exciting and new. And that's the beauty of the trail side versus the track side, right? You have like an ever-changing like landscape, and there's motivation from the environment you're in versus trying to just kind of white knuckle around a track all day long. And so I think like there's a balance there as well. So like Jim Walmsley is I would say he's one of the best ever, and certainly the best North American ultra runner right now on the men's side. And he's won the Western States now for the last 3 years. And he's trained on the course early on. And then after like the first year or two doing that, he was like, I think I can get better training at home in Flagstaff where I live. I know the course now, so I'm not going to go out there much at all before. I'll train in the Grand Canyon and there's loops around Flagstaff, and then head out on race day and just trust that he's been on the train enough, the type of train enough to execute. And I think that's what most people are probably going to do this at this point. Ultra Trail Mont Blanc is one where I think people oftentimes head out early and kind of get used to the course a little bit, get used to the area. But when you're racing internationally, that's maybe a bigger advantage to be out there early, just so you kind of so it feels like home by the time the race starts, and doesn't feel like, oh, I just hopped off a plane a couple days ago and now I'm running
it's
this
time to go. Yeah. Is there like a specific terrain or something that you prefer, or is there one you're like, damn it, like I am not looking forward to this? I'm terrible, relatively speaking, at technical downhill. So like that's one I have to really practice if I want to have any hope of moving through that terrain in a reasonable pace that would replicate like where my fitness status is at. So like the San Diego 100 has a lot of loose rocks in it. It's not super steep, relatively speaking, for mountain courses, but it does have a lot of technical loose rock stuff. So when I prepared for that, I was in a great spot to do it actually in Phoenix, because Phoenix has a lot of kind of hard trails, a lot of fixed and loose rock sections. You can find all of that. So I was able to do a ton of training on like loose rocks.
leading into that. And at that point, that was the best I had ever gotten at that type of training. And it worked well. I ended up winning that year. So I can do it, I think, if I give it enough time. I just have to spend a lot more time practicing it because I'm starting from such a more relatively low level than if I were to pick a track 100-miler. I can fast track that one a little quicker because I've just done it so many times, and there's less things for me to worry about having to catch up on.
Is there how many weeks do you prepare leading into a race?
Yeah, so if I look at it through two lenses, kind of, there's if I'm really strong aerobically already, then I'm looking at probably 16 weeks is a pretty good timeline to build up and peak. If I'm coming off an off season or an injury, so this year is a pretty good example of that. I had a little more time off in the back half of the year this last year. So then I'm looking at realistically more like a 24-week buildup, because then I can have 8 weeks to just focus on foundation, getting that base back. I like to focus on what's my pace at what I would consider the high end of easy. Mm-hmm. So there's generally speaking with running, there's easy, moderate, hard, and then there's ranges within those. And easy is usually one of the bigger ranges. So there's kind of the slower half of easy and the faster half of easy. I like to spend a ton of time in the faster half of easy during an 8-week buildup and get my pace really far down. So when I can get my pace down to kind of a low 6-minute mile on that high end of easy, then I know I'm really structured in a way where when I start putting on short intervals, long intervals, tempo runs, and then ultimately the long run development, I have that structure in place to kind of build that stuff onto it.
So now that you're living out here, do you usually when you're training, do you go do the trails out here, or are you going to a track area?
I've basically been running around Town Lake every day.
Oh yeah, over there.
I haven't gotten sick of it yet. So.
No, it's beautiful, man. I love it. That's one of my favorite things about when I moved to Austin, because I'd never actually been here before the day I moved here. It was just I'm from Idaho, so it was
you just rolled in.
Yeah, dude. I was living in Tacoma, and I hated it. And I was I got to get out of here. And I was looking at all of these different places to live, and Austin just looked like a ton of fun. And then I spontaneously came out here, and I was blown away at all the scenic stuff. Because up in Boise, where I'm from, it's very scenic, and but it's very seasonal as well. But there's mountains and hills and all that, and there's nothing here. So I'll meet people that they love that stuff, and they talk about trail running. I'm like, where are these trails?
Yeah.
It's so flatlanded, and so. Then I went down there to Town Lake, and I've seen those trails around Zilker and all that, and it's amazing. And the people that are running, there's a lot. And I didn't realize how long it was until I went to ACL a couple of years ago.
Yeah.
And we had to there's no parking, so we had to walk. But I'll have to take you to one of the other trails I know that's kind of out more in the hills. And we'll go hit that because, you'll hit that.
Yeah.
I'll be walking. I'll try to keep up for the first 2 minutes, and then I'm out.
We could just have me do an ultra the day before.
Yeah.
Then you'll make me look slow.
Yeah. We'll strategize that. We'll plan that one out. Because, so you were saying you usually have a team. They have the aid stations, but then they have the teams. Do you, are they in a car? Are they on a bike?
Yeah.
They're just rolling up behind you, just watching the whole time?
It really depends on the event. So the course will dictate kind of how you can structure your crew. When you have something on a track, it can be something as simple as a little card table and a person sitting there with your stuff, and you just ask. 400 meters later, they give it to you, and then you just keep doing that all day long. That's a little stressful on your crew because it is hard monitoring a runner for 12 hours, or if you're doing a 24-hour event, 24 hours. So I usually like to have a couple of people there so that they can give breaks, and someone doesn't feel like they have to be
the
watching.
Whole time.
Be because it's pretty stressful. And so that's kind of the bare minimum sort of if you're going to go with a crew. Then you get races where it's just logistically tough for vehicles, especially when you get out in these wilderness ones. So the funny thing is, I've crewed Western States so many times because my wife's run it 5 times, and I've crewed and paid some friends at it before, and that one is tough. You almost need 2 crew vehicles to do it optimally because you have to go so far out of the way to get from one aid station to the next. The runner will actually probably beat you to that next aid station if you try to have 1 crew vehicle. So at a race like that, you might have a few people in one vehicle, a few people in another, and they're leapfrogging one another, trying to help you manage your day if you want to have that much crew access. And sometimes the runner terms of too, there's people who just say, I don't want any crew. I'm just going to go out there. I'm going to
savages, lone wolf.
They'll do drop bags. So you can have like, you can drop off a bag, but the day before the race, and they'll take it out to an aid station, and they'll have like this little area designated where they have all the drop bags. So people will usually pick a bag that's pretty recognizable for them. They'll have their name on it. They'll run in there, they'll just grab it and out of there, and they'll get right back out there. So that's another way you can do it too, if you don't want to eat the aid station stuff, but you want, you're going to eat something along
the aid stations usually have? Like, is it just
junk food basically? Yeah.
Trying to sabotage your race too?
Well, it's a lot of like kind of finger food, like chips, pretzels, crackers, M&Ms, Skittles, candies, things like that. Are those
good for you while you're running?
I mean, to a degree, because I mean, when you think about it, like it's essentially, I mean, there's a lot of sports products there too. They'll have like the sports drinks, the little gels, and like they have like these blocks, which are basically like gummy bears essentially, that are more kind of like
electrolyte gummies. Yeah.
Yep. Stuff like that. There'll be a lot of that stuff there. Peanut butter jelly sandwiches. They'll have some solid food stuff, especially if it's a course where also it gets like really cold at night. They might have like chicken noodle soup or something like that. And I remember one time I was pacing someone at a race, and they were having a rough end. And which isn't super uncommon. You know, you get off a little bit pace-wise early on, you blow up or something happens, you get injured, and you're just moving way slower. So the person I was pacing ended up having to walk basically the last 20 miles, and we went through an aid station probably 12, 15 miles to the finish line or so, and they were like, I'm going to take a 15, 20-minute power nap and then finish this thing off. So I'm like, all right, cool. I wasn't going to fall asleep, so I was just talking to the aid station crew, and they were making bacon. I ate like a pound of bacon, I swear.
That sounds pretty good though, man. I ate bacon this morning.
It was delicious. It was delicious. Yeah. And I was like, but it was funny because it's like just the stuff you have options at there are pretty detailed. Like, I guess, I mean, I say junk food, but there's really a lot of different stuff, and it really depends on the race too. Some races have like their calling card or great aid stations, and geographically too. Like you go over to Europe, there's a lot more like cold cuts and cheeses and olives, pickles, that sort of stuff. Like, whereas you don't see as much of that over in the States. You see a lot more kind of like sodas, candies, that sort of stuff. So,
yeah, they how do they like monitor that? Because I gotta imagine there's these those fuckers that try to cheat, like jump in the truck or something, like on their way to when there's no one around.
Oh,
do they like put trackers or something, like the little eye tags or whatever?
Yeah, it's getting better and better. They'll have like tracking devices now, so a lot of times you can see where the person is out on the trail. So if someone were to, like, say, hop in a car and get driven to a different spot, you'd be able to tell on the tracker. The thing that usually catches that or keeps people in line is you go into an aid station, you have to check in and check back out. So a lot of times, like, if you would say have like a race where you're going a certain pace, then all of a sudden there's this one stretch where you went twice as fast for some reason, and then you're right back to your normal pace. They're like, okay, something's goofy going on there. So, and I mean, it's super uncommon. I think the sport does a pretty good job of policing itself.
There's a lot of integrity in it.
Yeah, there's a lot of, the culture is kind of like, why would you do that? And it started as, I mean, I'm sure there's other areas where it's maybe a little worse, but generally speaking, like the latest growth in the sport has been a lot of kind of grassroots type of stuff where they try to keep a lot of the history and the culture into the sport. And one of those is just kind of like, doing the right thing by your fellow runners. And I mean, really when I first started running ultras in 2010, there was still a lot of kind of the old school events where it was just like, oh, let's show up at this trailhead. We're all going to run 50K and then we're going to drink some beers afterwards. And that's kind of the idea. So it's like, if that's the objective, like what's the point of cutting that course? You get that built into the culture and it helps.
Yeah, it's one of those, like, you suffer together, celebrate afterwards.
Mm-hmm.
Like,
yeah,
it's one of the things I'm hoping to try to, and I've talked about this before. One of my goals with what I have and all this and all the things I'm doing in the future is to kind of focus on reintegrating like integrity and honesty back into all sports, because I have seen this huge growth in the fitness industry where it has become a lot of like cutting corners and cheating. Or it's become very politicized too. It's a lot of it's like who type of things can help people cut those corners or level up faster. And I'm more interested in, the best person, the best performer gets rewarded. And I remember actually, I think I did like a little mini ultramarathon thing my senior, or I think it was like my sophomore year of high school. Mm-hmm. I was wrestling, and they made us swim a mile, run 3 miles, and then we had to wrestle for an hour straight.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and it sucked. And I just remember like I was running and all my teammates were there because we went to the YMCA and then we swam, which was terribly like put together because in that time during wrestling season, it's like 15 degrees in Idaho.
Yeah.
So now I'm soaking wet. And then I had to go run and I'm freezing. And then we get to the wrestling room. But there were guys that showed up that were like behind me. And now then, like, that's why I asked that, is like they caught a ride and beat everyone there. And they just waited until some people started showing up. And then they like kind of joined the crew, and hated that. I hated that running. But that's cool to know that like there's that kind of that honor system among there. And no, I'm excited to come see you race in the future. And hopefully we start doing more stuff here. That's one of the goals with what I have is to, I've always been primarily involved. A lot of it was in the bodybuilding industry, and I don't compete. I just did the back end stuff. But I was so interested in all the other sports. And then when we met, we were at the comedy show. God, I keep forgetting. Was it Red Band show?
I think it's Red Band.
Yeah, and you were with Justin Wren. And I remember we hung out like that whole night, and I had never even thought about ultramarathon running or just cross country running is like a super competitive sport. And so looking more into that after we met, I was like, man, that's a gritty, like it's a mean sport. Like, you guys like go through some stuff. And, but then on top of that, so after like, do you think with post COVID and everything like that has made more people health conscious in the sense, or do you think like more people have become almost kind of gone backwards?
Yeah, it seems to me that it was kind of like one or the other. You get some people who kind of took control of it and were like, hey, here's this opportunity and good reason to get myself a little healthier. And then other people who maybe were like a little stressed out about the whole situation and found themselves kind of heading the wrong direction and getting out of shape. So I think like maybe we may have just separated those groups. It seemed like to me anyway that there's probably a lot of people who are already motivated to stay healthy and fit and stuff like that, maybe had a little more opportunity to build that into their routine a little easier. And people who didn't have a background in it and just didn't know what to do were kind of in a weird spot because it's like they probably knew they should be doing something, but were kind of at I wouldn't even say square one, maybe even square zero, where they just didn't know what to do. And then it's like you close all the gyms and stuff like that. It's like, where are you going to learn? So the running industry grew a lot because it was the option a lot of people still had.
Yeah.
And as we kind of learned more about COVID itself, it turned out like, running out in the wilderness is probably the safest activity you could do from a viral spread standpoint. So it's like those events kind of picked up a little quicker than other things did. So while like the big city marathons were still kind of getting canceled because, you jam 20, 30,000 people close together, it's a little harder to, from an optic standpoint especially, send people out on a 100-mile trail that spreads everyone out immediately. It's like, no one's really spreading COVID out there.
Yep.
So
that was my first interaction when COVID first started. Like that threw, just probably like everyone else can relate, like my whole world turned upside down. And I did get more into hiking trails and biking. I bought a bike and like I would go ride, and then I started walking trails, and I noticed there was tons of people on there. And I do think that, like you said, there has become kind of a split, and but I am starting to see this, it might just be an Austin thing too, this transition where people are becoming a lot more interested in like health and wellness and like ways to kind of create a more healthy lifestyle. And so that's why I was curious, like, and I was asking earlier as well, like if that had played a big role on your like regimen or your lifestyle, like, I got to imagine that your regimen as far as training, your normal routine probably didn't change much since, it's like here they closed all the gyms and everything, and we didn't really know what to do. I had my routine thrown off, and so did that really impact your lifestyle at all? Like, even just outside the regimen as far as like mindset goes and stuff like that?
Yeah, I would say structurally it didn't change too much because I could go outside and run basically throughout the entirety of it. So that wasn't really kind of setback. It wasn't like I didn't have to go to a gym, right? So I didn't do my strength work in a gym the way I would have. So that was probably the biggest hit. But the bulk of my training was, to be out on the roads and the trails and things like that. So I was able to do that. The hardest part of the thing I think I learned the most is how much motivation I actually do get from like having things on the calendar, even if they're like B races leading into an A race. So it really got me thinking about just like, how do you structure your goal setting along the course of like a 6-month build to a race? So when you think about it, like, when I decide, okay, I want to do this race, there's like this bit of excitement in the beginning. where it's like, oh, this is cool. Okay, this is the one it's going to peak for. And you get a few weeks, you're just like hyper motivated to do all the right things. And it's almost like that goal is so far away that motivation starts to wane a little bit. So you have to build in other goals along the way that kind of help you close that gap a bit. So that can be things like development and workouts. It can be things like I'm going to do this B race and see where my fitness is at and then move from there. And all these little kind of like check marks or goals that you can like chip off along the way are valuable. And these last 2 years where I've basically done just A races, if that, it's like, you know, you don't have a lot of those built into the programming. So you have to find other ways to do them. And so that kind of taught me a little bit about like looking at things differently in the way I maybe think about a build up to a race and what works for me and what doesn't work for me. So it did give me some opportunities to maybe explore a way, because there are people who are more kind of like, I want to just kind of disappear for a few months and then show up at this race and just crush it. And then I'll disappear for a few months. I'll show up at this race and crush it. And then there's folks who want to be at a race like as often as they can. They want to be there like every weekend essentially. And for me, I found I think I'm somewhere in between. Like I don't need to be at an event every weekend, but if I can be at a few events between the start of a program and a big race, that's kind of a sweet spot for me. So that was helpful to learn, I think. But yeah, a lot of mental, I think a lot of opportunity to kind of grow mentally and reflect on stuff. And the other side of it too is like timing wise, it was about as good as I could have imagined if you're going to like have a pandemic. Because in 2019, I was like, for whatever reason, I was just like hitting all my races. Like even my B-level races were ending up being like some of my better races. So like I had a year where I probably was just hitting it a little harder than normal. So having a couple of years where it was a little lower key is probably good for my longevity too.
And have you not had a race since prior to COVID? Have you not done any races?
I did the treadmill thing, which was technically a race. Well, it's technically not a race, but
like
it's kind of
competitive
like,
in-person race.
Yeah, so I've done a few. I did the USATF 100-mile road championships. I did the Desert Salsas Track Invitational 24-hour. I did the Tunnel Hill 100-miler, and I'm trying to think if I did anything else in there. No, I just did a lot of training for Transcon, and then that didn't bear fruit, at least not this time around. I shouldn't say that. Like everything like I did for it was like, I'm gonna eventually do that project. It's just about kind of figuring out the right time and place for it, because it's so logistically heavy. Like you get everyone lined up that's gonna help with it, then like you got to kind of find a time when they can all do that again, or likely find some new people, because chances are some of the people who are involved aren't going to be able to whenever you pick the next timeline. But anyway, like so that took a pretty big chunk out of the year. There's a lot of training, a lot of learning, and a lot of exploring different areas of the sport, but not a lot of like actual race results. So yeah.
Do you have like motivators? Like not, I know that you were saying, the race thing, races on your calendar kind of motivates you, but like as far as, individuals goals, like, do these races have like cash prizes, or are they just like giveaway prizes? Like, is there an actual aspect to the sport that you're like, the better I'm at, like, there's like a peak to it. Like,
yeah. So like professionally speaking, the sport doesn't have a lot of prize money. There is some, like the Comrades Ultramarathon, which is one of the biggest, one of the more competitive ultramarathons in the world, certainly on the roads. It's like a 56-mile ultramarathon in South Africa. I think you come away with somewhere in the neighborhood of $100,000 if you win that one. You might have to. Yeah, I think it's a lot relative to the sport. And then there's other races like Ultra Trail Mont Blanc Western States, which I've mentioned a few times, which are really big name races. They have no prize money. But you win one of those races and brands want to sponsor you. So that's where you kind of make the money from it. And you get name recognition, which helps grow things like social media channels if you have a podcast, coaching business, stuff like that. So for me, like, when I first started, it was all about results. Like results are what kind of paid the bills, so to speak. And then I kind of realized, well, those only last so long.
Yeah.
And in a sport where you're leaning on your body heavily, like you probably shouldn't put all your eggs in that basket. So it's like, how do you build kind of like a business around what you're doing so it's sustainable when you have a year like 2020, or when you retire? Like, what are you going to do with your time and your energy and stuff like that? So like for me, it was like over the last like few years, it's like I'm building up a podcast, building up social media channels, building up my coaching business and things like that, so that I have things to do outside of running. I'm also the type of person who, like, I don't have a problem putting in the work. Like 20-hour training weeks is not an issue for me. I'm highly motivated to do it. But I also like to do other things. So like, I don't want to
shooting.
Right. Yeah.
Dude, this guy's a crack shot, man. He shoot my 45 better than I was. It was insane. You never give up marathon running, you get into professional shooting, Olympic shooting.
The funny thing is I've done so little of it. Like historically, I've shot a lot of rifles and shotguns and stuff when I was in Wisconsin, like deer hunting and squirrel hunting and stuff like that. But like I've other than like airsoft pistols and things like that, I've really never shot handguns before. But I do. The funny thing is, the first time I ever shot a shotgun, I went to a range to sight it in, and the guy didn't believe me that it was the first time I shot it because I was hitting the target.
I thought you were lying when we went shooting.
I've had the same thing with bows too. Like
Really?
I'm sure like I mean it's all relative, right? But for someone who rarely does it, I tend to be all right at it. I don't know what it is. Maybe it's just kind of like I must just like release gradually or something like that, so I don't get a lot of like weird like flare from the gun or the bow or anything like that. But my wife and I joke around every once in a while. We're like, if you had to go back from the beginning and focus on becoming a professional at a sport other than running, what would you think your best shot would be? And I was thinking about that. I was like, maybe like target shooting would have been the move for me. Like if I started like age 10.
Yeah. You were killing it. The hog hunting is a big thing out here too.
Yeah.
Like, that's I guess they're like overrunning like Texas. Like there's a serious hog hunting problem or a hog, like I wouldn't even call it like an infant state. God, I can't even pronounce the word, but like there's a huge hog problem. So maybe that's something you get into too.
There you go.
Like it's becoming a big popular sport.
We already know I like bacon, so
there you go. Can you eat them? Can you eat the hogs too? Nah, I wouldn't.
Nah.
I don't know. I'll ask. I got a Tim.
There's got to be a way.
tomorrow.
There's got to be a way to cook them.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, really?
Really?
Oh,
we should go.
sign us up, yeah.
Dude. Well, I got Tim Kennedy on tomorrow, and he does the helicopter hog hunting.
Yeah.
I'm gonna ask. Maybe he'll take us. Maybe eat that.
That'd be sweet. I think I want to get back into hunting. I hunted a fair bit in like high school age, and then when I moved from Wisconsin to California, I just got busy with stuff, so I just never got back into it. And it was like I didn't ever get the. I never took the time to really kind of get into the new state stuff. So then same thing with Arizona. Every year I was like, okay, I'm going to get back into hunting, and then another year would pass, and then here we are in Austin.
I never I growing up in Idaho. Like I have like family and friends that they do that. They love doing that, and I've never been hunting ever. I want to go.
Yeah.
The people are blown away when I tell them that because I used to go camping all the time, but no, never went hunting. Went scouting one time. I had a buddy it was off season, and we went up in the mountains. I thought we were just going camping, and this dude I got lost in the woods because he was just this like hiking, and he was scouting different positions to come back and hunt deer that later during the season. And there was no way I could keep up with him. Like this guy had like kind of just left me hanging, and I lost him. And I hiked around for like 4 hours till I bumped into him again. Just
There's
like
your ultramarathon.
I was so scared too because like there's bears up there. Yeah, that was my ultramarathon, and I just kind of took a seat and was like, well, this is my life now. Like I'm gonna live in the woods. Yeah,
Wild man now.
yeah, but no, yeah, it's crazy. They hunting is very physically demanding too, though. Like I gotta imagine since I've never been and done it, but they you could definitely get into shooting.
It is an interesting sport because most people think hunting is like, look what I did when I was in the Midwest, sitting up in a deer stand and just waiting for the deer to come by.
Snipe one out.
Whereas you get it's an interesting because like you see a lot more interest in ultra running from that group, like the real backcountry hunters. Yeah. And I think some of that's, you get guys like Cam Hanes who have a big signal boost that are talking about it and saying, hey, this is how I prepare for these backcountry hunts, and we'll tell you to get in shape before you go out there, or get out of the deer stand and get physical and drag that thing out of there. And I think he's put a big sign on the sport as a
create
tool.
a lot of interest in it.
Yeah. So you see a lot more hunters and people with that kind of passion say, hey, if I'm going to be doing this is another great thing that I can be doing along the side to be ready for it. And that's cool to see too.
Yeah, I mean, those are all things now that I want to start getting into as far as that. I definitely plan on trying to go run with you, ultramarathon stuff. I feel like if I have a brand like this, I should start becoming more acquainted with all the additional sports out there as opposed to just lifting weights. And ultramarathon's on the list. We'll go do the run too. And then God, what were we talking about? It was right before I got into shooting. He's
talking about sports that I think I was talking about sports that I would focus on. We were talking about what
we were talking about just kind of like ultra running careers, I think, and I was talking about just building around the racing side of things with like podcasting and stuff like that.
Oh, yeah, man. God, I get so distracted easy, man. It's because we were talking about like how like do people basically live off of like professional like ultramarathon running and stuff like that. So no, yeah, okay, now we're on track. Yeah, I besides that as well, you know, I know you got your show and you're doing the stuff with the sponsors as well and everything. And then, but we were also talking about motivators. So like, are there getting more into the sport? Were there guys from the past or maybe even current that you kind of like admire that kind of keep you motivated as well to continue to, you know, keep competing, or, you know, those guys or records you want to break and things like that?
Yeah. I think especially when I got into this sport, there was a couple guys that I kind of followed closely. I thought just were interesting. One guy was Mike Morton. So he was interesting to me because when I first started learning about the trail side of this stuff, he was an interesting person because he had broke the course record at the Western States 100 in 1997, and he was I want to say he was the first person east of the Mississippi that ever won that race. And so, like, it was kind of a shocker. Everyone's like, you got to live out west if you want to win the Western States 100, and you certainly have to live out there if you want to break the course record. Well, he did it from Florida. So that was an interesting guy. And the thing that kind of got my attention about him was after he did that in 1997, he basically retired for like 10 years because he had some injuries and some career stuff that was kind of making it more difficult for him to kind of pursue that. And then he came back around the same time I got into the sport. And now he's like in his 40s. He was in his like maybe late 30s, early 40s when he first did his next race after like 10 years off. And just started like ripping all these runnable 100-milers, like running a bunch of like low 13-hour 100 miles on like courses that weren't track flat, but really flat relative to like Western States or a lot of the trail stuff. And he got into Western States as like a 42 or 41-year-old. And was you know, the first time back since he had broke the course record in 97. This would have been 2013, so it was 16 years later. And he was an interesting guy because he had been winning some races, but I don't think anyone expected him to win the race. And he ended up getting third, breaking the Masters record at the course. And the two guys who beat him are like two of the best guys to ever run that course. They both won back-to-back years. One of them had the course record for a while. Another guy came within a couple minutes of the course record on a year that was quite a bit hotter, so it was like considered by some the most impressive race at the time. And here Mike is like nipping at these guys' tails as a 40-some-year-old and 16 years removed from the time he won it. So that was kind of cool. A guy that, and he was just kind of a no-nonsense guy in the sense that like he didn't overthink things. Because I mean, there's so much you can think about, so many things you can take care of, and you want to make sure you have all your ducks in a row when you go into these events. But you also at a certain point have to say like, okay, I've taken care of the things I can. Now I just need to go out there and run it and address situations as they come. If there's going to be things I don't expect that happen that I have to problem solve, there's going to be parts that feel good, parts that don't, and I just got to be ready to kind of navigate that. And I remember I was listening to a podcast with Mike, and he was like, someone asked him, was like, so how are you so strong in these 100 miles? Like, what is your mindset and stuff? And he's like, well, I just kind of go there and say I'm going to do it, so I just do it. And he's like a military guy too, so it's
the most simple answer ever.
Right. He's like, this is easy. The orders were run 100 miles, therefore I'm going to do that.
Yeah, A and B.
Yeah. So it's like, oh, that's cool. It's like he's not letting a lot of extra stuff just kind of creep into his mind. I mean, he's like anybody. I'm sure he's got he has his highs and lows during the race itself and things like that, and he's got to slay those mental demons too. But you know, you simplify some things to a degree where it's like easier for you to move through and save yourself a little mental energy.
So you might be able to help me with this one, but I remember a long time ago, I was younger, I was watching like those Ripley's, believe it or not, like crazy people. And there was a guy that had like, his body didn't produce lactic acid.
Yeah.
So like, how's that dude not like own every record? Like, do you know who I'm talking about?
Yeah.
I don't know his name. I can't remember.
Dean Karnazes, was it? Because I want to say they did one study. Like, there's very little research on ultramarathons, but he actually did a transcon run, that San Francisco, New York route, and they had, I want to say it was the Colorado Springs, University of Colorado Springs or something like that, did a bunch of research on him, and they were showing that like first of all, he produced a lot less lactic acid or something like that, and then secondly, it was like as they were monitoring him along the way, it was like his body kind of went like this over the first like week to week and a half, and then it hit a spot, and then it started kind of improving. So it was like his body like figured out what was going on and then just started kind of like getting stronger versus weaker over the course of it, which is just weird.
Crazy.
Yeah.
Yeah. I just remember that was, I think, my first ever encounter with like what like these long distance runners do in the ultra marathon. And I was like, isn't that cheating? Like this guy has like superhuman abilities and things.
Yeah.
So for a lot of people watching too, we have such a wide demographic. So if there's someone that's like interested into getting into ultra marathon running or, any of those long distance things, what would you say to someone beginning in it? Like, what would you say to like prep for or start training and regimens like that besides hitting you up to
go to zachritter.com and sign up for some coaching.
There you go.
No, it's funny. I think honestly, like the community is very welcoming. So, but they may not come out and grab you. So I think like just injecting yourself into some of it is a really good move, because once you try to jump into stuff, people are like really willing to help. They want to share information with you. They want to let you know what works for them and what doesn't and things like that. So a lot of times what I think works well is trying to find like some group runs where there are some ultra runners there. Or sometimes these events will have like preparation days where like for a few weeks leading into the race, like you can go out there and run part of the course with other people who are going to do the event. And those kind of like get you end up meeting people that are going to help you out a lot along the way. If you're not ready to jump into the physical side of things, I would say find some like ultra running like discussion stuff on social media or websites and things like that, and just dive into some of that, and feel free to ask questions, though people are really willing to help when you ask them in that sport. So it's really helpful, I think, to just kind of get involved with the community and don't overthink performance. I mean, you'll see any type of like, regardless of who hears this, whatever shape you're in, there's someone in worse shape than you doing these things.
Yeah. Just compare yourself to me and you'll be a champion. Yeah.
Right. So it's like, there's no one is going to like judge you for not being like at your best right out the gate. And everyone's there for like a unique reason in a lot of cases. So it's very understanding with that too. So like, I think it's a very welcoming sport. And I hate it when people think like, oh, I can't do that because I'm not ready for it. And these people are all like, so evolved and developed within it. It's like, there's a lot of opportunity for new people to come in and learn and stuff. And there's a lot of people willing to share the information. It's less of a sport where they try to hide what's working for you. It's more of a like, oh, this worked for me. Let's talk about it. And I really that's probably part of the reason that drew me to something like ultra running versus like maybe triathlon, where it's a little more like, I'm going to hide my training philosophy because if someone finds out about it and replicates it, they're going to beat me. Like
so selfish. Yeah. Yeah. One of the things I've experienced, and, we were speaking earlier about like, one of my goals is to kind of reintroduce integrity and honesty, make that more of a prominent thing. Is there, and part of that is one of the things I see a lot, especially with personal trainers, is this cookie cutter bullshit, or it's like these training regimens that don't work, or a lot of basically just like misinformation when it coming into the sport, and a lot of it is just weight loss, things like that. But what do you think is something that a beginner should look out for? Like they're going to hear from normal coaches or something, or not normal coaches, but like some of the biggest beginner mistakes that someone getting into it might run into, something to avoid.
Yeah, it's a good question. I think generally speaking, most people in ultra running are going to be like, they're going to tell you what they actually think, like right or wrong. Here's the next step. But they're not going to try to deceive you in most cases. So that's good. It's a good starting point. Then it's just about like, how do you deal with a sport that is mostly anecdotes and very little research? So there is a little bit of kind of trial and error, problem solving, leaning on things that worked for a big group of other people and things like that. And then kind of pairing that with the research we do have is kind of a good starting point. But the one thing I think that gets kind of messed up a lot of times across the board from experienced to inexperienced ultra runners or beginners to advanced is pacing.
Yeah.
It's a sport where I think somewhere along the line, we started as a community kind of thinking in a mindset of the end is going to be like really miserable almost no matter what. So bank some time early so that when that point hits, you've got a little bit of cushion. And I think you can bank some time and still run a strong or maybe your best race, but most people are going to find themselves in a position where they go out too fast and end up giving back like an hour in the second half of the race or more in some cases. So, I mean, all of us have done it. And the best intention, if you do enough of them and you actually put yourself out on the line and go for like what you think you're capable of, you're going to have a scenario where you overreach and end up blowing up and having a really rough second half. That's just kind of part of exploring your limits. But when you kind of start whittling that stuff down and have an idea of like what a reasonable finishing time is, I think like trying to bank time in the beginning is a big mistake a lot of people make, and it ends up costing them time ultimately. So usually it's like if you think you're going too slow in the beginning of 100 miles, slow down a little bit yet, because even if you are a little bit behind 30 miles in, you got 70 miles to catch up.
Yeah.
And I've had some experiences where like you pace right and you actually feel stronger and better in the end of the race than the beginning. And I think there's a lot of ultra runners who just rarely or don't get that experience, so they don't know that that's possible. So they think it's going to suck, better bank time, versus if I don't try to bank a bunch of time in the beginning, I'll actually feel better at the finish than I did at the beginning or in the middle. And that's kind of a little bit of a paradigm shift for a lot of ultra runners, I think. So if you're coming in new, try to reasonably pace yourself.
That's great info. So, I mean, even as I guess as a little bit of a plug for you, like if someone goes, okay, like what this guy's talking about, like what do they, if they want to train under you or like do your programming, what do they got to expect?
Yeah. So I have I've gone different directions with my coaching in the past. It's like, I think obviously one-on-one personalized coaching with a ton of access is the gold standard. Like that's how you're going to be able to like get to where you want to be the quickest and have the most support, but it's not something that everyone either needs or can access at times. So I've more recently kind of built out my catalog a little bit. So I have like pre-made plans that are just following my philosophy at a specific distance at different levels of ability. So if someone is like, I'm new, I think like Zach's philosophy is in line with what I would like to do, and I'm going to do a 50K. I'm going to go get a 24-week plan that he made, and I'm fine following it myself and exploring this on my own, which I can appreciate because like, you know, like there is some fun in the exploration. You don't necessarily want to have your hand held the whole way, because then you don't necessarily always like learn the way that you want to learn. But I think there are people that need that and want that. So I have those plans. Then I have like kind of the foundation of my personalized planning where like people will send me like, I'm training for this race. This is my schedule. These are my days that are most stressful. These are my days that are most open. This is the availability I have. This is where my current training is at. This is where my historic training is at. And that can be anything from I've never run before to I've been running for the last 15 years. And then I will build a plan specifically to their schedule, their needs, their abilities, their goal race, and all that stuff. And that's kind of like the foundation plan. And then from there, if they want more support beyond the plan itself, they can access like email collaboration, consultation calls, and things like that. So kind of what I would describe as kind of like the higher level coaching package would be like the personalized plan with email collaboration and then a couple like 30-minute consult calls per 4 weeks. And that's going to be a fair bit of hand holding, but it's going to eliminate a lot of the mistakes. So I like to offer like the full spectrum of stuff because, you know, for some people want to learn through trial and error and want a little bit of direction, but then they want to be able to manipulate themselves. Other people want just to be like, tell me what to do and when to do it and I'll do it. And they want to expedite that process because they're busy and they have other things to care about. So for them, having me kind of or offloading that part of the sport onto a coach is going to be in their best interest.
And so with your programs, do you offer like, you know, obviously the Regimen, is there like a nutrition plan as well? Is there like even like a product offer? Like, you know, you're going to probably want to use these products, accessories, things like that. You know, is that all inclusive? I'm assuming in the program, since primarily probably going to be online.
Yeah, so the way I look at it is like from the nutritional side of things, I think like there are some things that are universal where it's like, you know, you run 100 miles, you're probably gonna have to eat something, you're probably gonna have to hydrate and get some electrolytes. So like there's some foundational things that I'll talk to with, you know, any of my personalized clients when we do like their onboarding call that comes with that package. If they want to go real deep into nutrition though, there's just, it's time intensive for both of us. So those are usually best done with the consultations because a lot of times with nutrition, the thing I want to avoid is people thinking, oh, this is what Zach does, therefore I have to do it that way, and that's the only path forward. Like I've just seen that mentality happen in the sport where it's like an absolutist mind thought where it's like, okay, this is what we should do. Everyone does it. If you can't make this work, it's your fault, not the approach's fault. When I look at the scope of ultra running, it's like maybe this works more often than another strategy, but that doesn't mean I just throw the other strategy away, because what if I have a coaching client that comes to me and one of their goals is to use that strategy for whatever reason, and maybe unrelated to the sport itself, it may be something specific to them where it's going to work better than for them in the sport itself. So I usually want to find out, like, what are you currently doing? How are you feeling with it? Like, is it working? Is it not working? And before I start kind of making changes to things that are working for them, I want to know that, because we don't want to necessarily create problems that aren't there either. So like a good example of that is like you have these races where everyone's goal, regardless of what your nutrition plan is, to defend muscle glycogen. Like that's that small fuel tank we talked about earlier. So it just depends what it takes to defend that muscle glycogen is going to be dependent on that person's fat oxidation rates or the ratios of carbs to fats that they're burning at the intensity they're racing. So there's that part of the equation where like you can go and get a metabolic cart test done and kind of find those numbers, or you can kind of play around with averages and stuff like that. But generally what happens is people will find out through experience, I can tolerate eating this much food during a race. And some people can tolerate a lot. Some people can barely tolerate anything. I've worked with people who it's like, if we have like 100 calorie gel per hour, they start having issues by the end of the race. Then I have other people who they're having 4 of those things an hour, or the equivalent of 4 or 5 of those things an hour, no problems at all. So those are 2 very different nutritional approaches. Like I have the person who's able to just mainline food all day long. They can probably eat whatever diet they want going in. Like they don't have to worry about fat oxidation rates as much. They don't have to worry about like, carb ratios to fat metabolism, stuff like that. They can basically just defend their muscle glycogen by eating as often and early as they can, as long as they're logistically able to do that. No big deal. I get the person with can barely stomach anything. That person, we may need to look at how do we raise your fat oxidation rates to a point where you can get away with very little fueling, and also maybe put them in a position where they can potentially raise that. Like that's a pretty big extreme to be able to do 1 gel. Most people can do a fair bit more than that.
Yeah.
But getting them into a point where they can actually match their needs with what they're eating and what kind of dietary support kind of matches that. So that's kind of the starting point with that. And then we get into it after a while, and sometimes we'll have like a plan where I think this is probably the direction you should go, and we end up inching them back towards something different. And we just find out kind of through, if you use performance as the guide, I think you find that spot that works best for them. So if their workouts are going in the right direction, if their progress is happening, then then we're doing something right with nutrition. So then it's just like kind of keeping track of what you're doing and making small adjustments to suit what exactly you're doing from a race standpoint and a preference standpoint to some degree.
No, I love that. Yeah, because I mean, a big issue I have that I see in a lot of cases with just any kind of type of training program is it's not personalized. And like you were saying, it's, they must be doing this, that's what I want to do.
Yeah.
And it's like people need to take those factors into account because, some people might be allergic to things, they need to take into account previous injuries. And it's like, I see programming all the time. I have friends that reach out to me like looking for coaches, and there's very, very small amount of coaches I'll recommend because they actually take that into account. And, I get tired of seeing that.
Yeah, the worst one is like you'll see this even with personalized coaching, where it's like, here's my philosophy, and we're gonna plug and play that philosophy, and there's gonna be some detailed analysis involved, but ultimately there's kind of like this weird kind of aura of like, this is what works. If you can't figure out how to make it work, then it's you, not the plan. And it's like, that's
the blame game.
Yeah. And it's, for me, it's like, if my philosophy doesn't work with a person for something that they can hardly control, then it's my job as a coach to find the best possible solution for this individual. So like, for example, I was a coaching client before where anytime we'd have him do short intervals, he'd get injured. So it's like, well, how do we navigate that section of the plan? And like, to me, it's like, well, there's a couple ways we can eliminate those short intervals so those injuries don't happen, because getting him to the starting line healthy, maybe with like a missing piece to the puzzle, but leaning a little more heavily into things that are going to keep him healthy and consistent, is at least going to get him there and able to participate. Or is there also a way we can mimic those in a way that's not going to hurt them? So a lot of times it's the impact of that really fast turnover and the relatively more harsh like side of running fast versus running slow. or abrupt maybe is the way to say it. So what we do with him is, well, let's try doing it on an incline so that you're still getting that high intensity interval, but you're minimizing the impact. If that still injures you, well, let's move it. Let's reduce the impact even more. Let's do your short intervals on like a Stairmaster or a treadmill or something, or not a treadmill, a Stairmaster or like an elliptical or something that's going to like be a lot less stressful from an impact standpoint, and try to like mimic that through that, or like pool running or something. Like there's a lot of, depending on what the person has available to them, like there's a lot of other ways to go about it if you need to. And really at the end of the day, being consistent and staying healthy is a huge piece of the puzzle. So like if you can't do that, like there's no one workout that's going to be worth doing if it's going to get you injured and make you unable to be consistent.
No, dude, absolutely. Yeah. It's, you nailed it on the head. Cause I do see a lot of coaches that do the blame game. You know, it's, they're not getting results off my philosophy. It must be their fault.
You did it wrong.
Yeah, exactly. Like no one wants to solve problems anymore. It's just blame. And it drives me bananas when I see it. And so, no, that's cool, man. Yeah. And people can find you at zachbitter.com.
Yeah, zachbitter.com is kind of the main hub that has like links to my social media channels, coaching stuff, podcast links, and all that stuff. So that's the one that kind of
the main resources.
Funnel everything into there.
So they to kind of, I guess, wrap things up a little bit. Where can everyone find you at? Where are all the socials, the links, things like that?
Yeah, Instagram is at ZachBitter, and Zach is with an H, so ZachBitter. Twitter is at ZBitter. Facebook is at ZBitter Endurance, and then my website, zachbitter.com, are kind of the main hubs.
Well, hell yeah, man. Well, I appreciate you coming out, man. First one in the books.
Yeah.
I'm excited to get this train rolling because, I was delaying this for so long, trying to get everything scheduled and built.
My goal now, one of the reasons I came to Austin last year was to do Justin Wren's podcast, and I was his first guest too. So, I think I was his first. I think maybe I'm remembering that. No, I'm pretty sure I was. And so if that's true, and now I'm the first one here, I want to become the Austin podcast
just
icebreaker.
The first guest on everyone's show.
Gets all the hosts warmed up.
Right, dude. No, yeah, I have no idea what I'm doing. I remember I was talking to, I don't know. I think it was just a friend that came in, and they were like, so have you ever done this? What are you going to do? I'm like, dude, I have no idea what I'm doing. I was like, I've never interviewed. I've always been behind the scenes. And then it didn't really feel real until the mural got done. Yeah. My buddies over at Laced and Found did it. And then I remember coming here one day, getting everything ready, just looking at it like, oh shit, like this is going to happen. And then, I was excited when when I hit you up and you were saying you were actually moving out here. Yeah. And then, 2 weeks now or 3 weeks?
Yeah. 3.
And, things are kicking off, and I'm super excited. I know we've talked about doing some stuff together, and that'll be so fun to do in the future. And super grateful that you came through, man. And I learned a lot just now. Like it was so hard when we would hang out. I think I was telling you this last time we were hanging out, where I was like, there's so many things. And we were hanging out in here, and I was like, damn it, we should have just been doing the show right now. Like, I was like, fuck, well.
The funny thing is, like, once you get rolling, as long as, like, when you're first starting, like, my experience anyway, I did a bunch of podcasts as a guest before I ever hosted them. And, like, it was a lot of learning from the host side. Part of that was because I was also trying to do what you're doing over there, which was probably a bad idea.
Oh yeah, Marlon's on top of it, but he leaves town tomorrow, so I got to show someone else how to do it too.
You learn like how the difference is from host to guest side of things, and driving a conversation versus kind of responding and that sort of stuff. But early on,
it's fun.
Well, it's someone you can talk to, and then it gets pretty easy.
Yeah, it's going to get more intense. And on top of that too, like I mentioned really early at the beginning of the show, was this whole time I'd kept my face off this. Like I always liked that. I founded it 3.5 years ago, and I get asked this question all the time, like, how did you start it, things like that, and it was totally by accident. Like I was working at a nutrition store. I had all this pressure to have a big Black Friday sale, and I worked like 65 hours a week. Like the turnover was so bad, and I was half cocked on whiskey talking to my dad back home, and I was trying to come up with ways to market the Black Friday sale. And so he was like, why don't you get a billboard? And I'm like, dude, I have no budget. Like there's nothing for that. And he goes, well, why don't you have a local fitness page? Like feature your stuff. And I was like, yeah, I guess so. And I looked, and there wasn't any. So I just said, I'll start my own.
Yeah.
Made the original logo on paint. Like there was no effort put into it. The first couple features were just my friends, and then it just blew up. And then
I started just kind of following the demand. You know, I'd have people be like, you should do like a community event. So I held like an open gym over at Big Tex where we went, and it was crazy. It just filled up with people, and like the parking lot packed up. And I was like, damn, all these people came here for this. And then I had people asking for apparel. And so I had the local apparel company, they do screen print stuff, make some Rock Sports. And they sold out within like 30 minutes. It was crazy. Just basic t-shirts. And then, just kind of followed the demand. And now 3.5 years later, here we are podcasting, got a bunch of cool guests lined up to come and some big events coming up that I'm not allowed to talk about till I'll tell you later. I'm just excited to get the ball rolling. And now I'm trying to really expand on the demographic of sports as well. So that's why I was super excited to talk to you about all this stuff and get linked up with you when you moved out here. And, that's why I really wanted to include everything on this mural as well. As far as, I don't even know.
You got good representation.
Let me see here. I got someone climbing a rope. That's CrossFit. I think that's powerlifting, kettlebells, bicycling, swimming, and then we got you on the end running over there.
There you go.
So, yeah. So that's what I'm saying. But, no, man, again, appreciate you coming out. I'm excited to get this thing rolling. We'll definitely do it again. We'll throw it back. And then
for sure.
I'll come help you. I'll come on your show. We'll come do that.
Yeah,
and
let's do it.
We'll get you some people too. And then I think that's about it. So we'll make some plans here in the future. So
cool.
All right.
Sounds good. Thanks for having me on.
Man.